The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University. The book we're reading today is The American Revolution of 1800, written by Dan Sisson with a little bit of help from me and mostly edited by me. I wrote a foreword for it. But it's an absolutely brilliant history of the election of Thomas Jefferson and the times. So reading from chapter 1, page 9. Starting out, a quote from Thomas Paine. "For it is the nature and intention of a constitution to prevent governing by party." Oh, really? So often in the past century, the political history of America reveals a paralysis in the highest levels of our government. Legislation fails to pass, budgets are voted down, compromise seems impossible, and the problems of the nation are neither addressed nor solved. There have been brief periods, of course, when this was not the case. The New Deal is usually held up as an example of a time when American politicians actually came together to fundamentally transform the nature and the political landscape of our country. But in the generations since then, more often than not, we've seen gridlock rather than collaboration. Conventional wisdom says that's the way it should be. The founders of this country, the men who wrote the Constitution, wanted there to be a loyal opposition to serve as a balance against excessive power in the hands of any one political party or even president. That's conventional wisdom. Not only is that not true, but this pervasive myth has done considerable harm to our nation and continues to do so. The men in power from 1790 to 1801 did not even remotely conceive of the modern two-party system. In fact, the opposite is true. They wish to consolidate and perpetuate a one-party system in politics in the United States, and were successful in their lifetimes. The terms party and faction have had such a long history that they were widely assumed by American statesmen to be part of human nature. This, at least, was the approach taken by the two men most responsible for establishing the theoretical guidelines of the early republic, the early American Republic. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton attempted to analyze the terms in light of their influence on the political system. Their Federalist essays presented an analysis of party and faction that is more than consistent with the history of the terms we've reviewed. Madison referred to the violence of faction as a dangerous vice characteristic of free governments. By faction, Madison wrote, "I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community." In other words, faction is anti-America. He continued, "The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere." Thus, party, as Madison understood it, was not something of recent origin. Parties have been around since the beginning of man. And he noted, quote, "The most numerous party, or in other words, the most powerful faction, must be expected to prevail." He ends his analysis on this note: "To secure the public good and provide rights against the danger of such a faction, that is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed." Thus, Madison captured the essence of the term faction and party as they were understood by his contemporaries. The faction and party were inescapably rooted in human nature and produced violence, zeal, animosity, oppression, and danger, all adverse to the interests of the community. He added, quote, "Men of factious tempers, or of local prejudices, or of sinister designs may by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means, first obtain the suffrages, the vote, and then betray the interests of the people." His conclusion is that factions must be broken and controlled. They are at all costs not to be legitimately recognized or encouraged. Madison was not alone in his aversion to faction and party. Alexander Hamilton, too, warns the reader, quote, Ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives, not more laudable than these, were typical of that intolerant spirit which has at all times characterized political parties. End of quote. Registering his disgust for faction, Hamilton continued, "It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy." Hamilton, we might note, connects ancient history with modern America. The tempestuous situation, he writes, from which Massachusetts has scarcely emerged, he was talking about Shays' Rebellion, evinces the dangers of this kind are not merely speculative. Who could determine what might have been the issue of her late convulsions if the malcontents had not been headed by a Caesar or a Cromwell? End of quote. In Federalist number 77, he describes the influence of faction and party intrigue, connections, and, quote, personal influence in government in a way that was characteristic of the terms from classical times through the age of Robert Walpole. Hamilton wrote, "Every mere council of appointment, however constituted, will be a conclave in which cabal and intrigue will have their full scope. And as each member will have his friends and connections to provide for, the desire of mutual gratification will beget a scandalous bartering of votes and bargaining for places." What is worth noting here is not only Hamilton's description of the influence of party and faction upon an administration, but his general description of politics. He's describing the politics of England for the previous century and a half. Moreover, he understands that encouraging party and faction at the theoretical as well as the practical level guaranteed that the emergent system of American politics would be propelled into the futile violence and dissension that had plagued every republic in history. Throughout the remainder of his political career, Hamilton reserved a special contempt for parties. The American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson and Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Boy, a lot going on tomorrow. The Cheeto-in-Chief is going to give his State of the Union address. This is going to be interesting, how he threads this needle. He's saying he wants to raise defense spending by 10%. That would be $50 to $60 billion. But he's got to do away with things like, you know, the arts programs that cost a few million. Let's voucherize Medicaid. Let's be sure to do that, right? That'll save us some money. It's starting to get real, is what's going on here, and I think that it's not going to go well for these guys when Americans start realizing what the real agenda of the Republican Party is and has been basically since the Reagan capture of the Republican Party. The Reagan capture of the Republican Party turned it into the party of fat cats and billionaires and transnational corporations. Now, it had been largely that since the 1880s, but this was like a complete cementing where, you know, prior to 1980, the Republicans used to be honest. You know, they used to say, no, we don't believe in Social Security. It's socialism. And socialism is not the principle upon which our government was founded, and it's not a standard that we should be using here in the United States. So let's do away with Social Security. That was an honest statement. You could disagree with it. I disagree with it. Well, I don't disagree that it's socialism. I think you could argue that it's a dimension of socialism, but I'm a fan of Social Security, right? I get it. Republicans aren't. Same thing for Medicare. Same thing for Medicaid. Same thing for any kind of support for average working people, whether it's supporting their right to unionize or whether it's supporting their right to deduct their credit card interest from their taxes, which, by the way, was done away with by Republicans. But now, you know, Donald Trump ran on this populist platform of, I'm the guy who's going to protect your Social Security. I'm the guy who's going to protect your Medicare. I'm the guy who's going to protect your Medicaid. Don't worry, we're not going to touch those programs. Now that it seems to have dropped down to just, we'll protect your Social Security and your Medicare, because those are people over 65 who are vigorous in their enthusiasm to vote. But Medicaid, at least in the states that expanded it, which is, you know, a majority of the states in the union, but you've still got a bunch of red states where you've got governors who are trying to screw their lower income working people in order to make a point about how much they hated that black man in the White House, you know, President Obama. You've got these states that have refused to expand Medicaid coverage. So it doesn't matter to them. I mean, I heard this very disingenuous interview this morning. Don't recall if it was on MSNBC or NPR. And, you know, where the guy was going, well, you know, it's going to impact some states a whole lot more than others if they do away with Medicaid or if they dial it back. Well, of course it is. It's going to whack the blue states that said, sure, we'll take the Medicaid expansion dollars. And the few red states, this is why John Kasich is out there saying, hey, wait a minute, because he expanded Medicaid in Ohio. Now, he did it the way that Republicans do it. You run it through an insurance company so that your campaign donors can skim enough money off the top to run enough ads to keep you in office. I mean, this is a Republican catechism. But, you know, that's what's going on. You've got a couple of Republican states that had expanded Medicaid, albeit with a waiver so that they could bring their corporate buddies into the game. And they're saying, well, wait a minute. But see, Medicaid is, you know, you're not even eligible for Medicaid if you earn over some, you know, it's state by state, but if, you know, more or less in the neighborhood of around $16,000 to $20,000 a year, you are no longer eligible. It's only if you make less than that. And one of the things that Republicans know is that the working poor have the lowest voting records of pretty much anybody in the United States. And the reason why is because they're the working poor. They're working 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week. Literally every hour that they work, or literally every hour that they don't work, is a decrease in their paycheck. So they're much less likely to take time off from working on a weekday that is not a holiday on, you know, the first Tuesday in November. They're not going to do that. They can't. They can't afford to. So if you screw them, if you say, you know, we're gonna stick it to the people who are on Medicaid, there's not much blowback in the polls. And Republicans have known this forever. It's why they are constantly trying to turn programs that benefit everybody, like Social Security and Medicare, into means-tested programs. In other words, they only benefit people who make under a certain amount of money. Once you turn those programs into what is essentially perceived by middle-class America as welfare programs, they're a hell of a lot easier to kill. And that's what's going to be happening. Meanwhile, Republican lawmakers, in today's Washington Post, Chris Ingram wrote this. Actually, it was Friday's Washington Post. Chris Ingraham. The headline pretty much says it all. Republican lawmakers introduce bills to curb protesting in at least 18 states. So some are, Chris Ingraham writes, some are introducing bills because they say they're necessary to counter the actions of paid professional protesters. Right. What happened when the Tea Party was doing this? I mean, you go back and you look at the Tea Party. It was started back in the 90s originally by the tobacco lobby, the tobacco industry. Didn't work out so well. Then in 2002, it got picked up as the U.S. Tea Party and is registered. USTeaparty.com is registered to FreedomWorks. This was in 2002. Obama was not, I think at that point in time, he was not even a United States senator. But the Koch brothers wanted to spread this argument that, you know, taxes on billionaires are too high. Regulation of polluting industries like Koch Industries and Georgia Pacific and all the other companies that those regulations are too stiff. Yeah, you know, combined, Charles and David Koch are probably the richest person in the world, but they can't make enough money. So this from Brendan DeMell, writing over the Huffington Post back on April 13th, 2013. I mean, we kind of have to step into the Wayback Machine. The two main organizers identified in the UCSF quarterback study. This was a study on, you know, where did the Tea Party come from? It was funded by the National Cancer Institute or the National Institutes of Health. So this was funded by your government money. The study, quote, traces the roots of the Tea Party's anti-tax movement back to the early 1980s when tobacco companies began to invest in third-party groups to fight excise taxes on cigarettes, as well as health studies finding a link between cancer and secondhand cigarette smoke. The two main organizations identified in this study are Americans for Prosperity and FreedomWorks. Now, these are both creatures of the Kochs. Both groups are now, quote, supporting the tobacco company's political agenda by mobilizing local Tea Party opposition to tobacco taxes and smoke-free laws. Keep in mind, this was the early 2000s. FreedomWorks and Americans for Prosperity were once a single organization called Citizens for a Sound Economy, CSE. CSE was founded in 1984 by the Koch brothers. In 2002, when they rolled out the U.S. Tea Party, it was a national event hosted continuously online, open to all Americans who feel our taxes are too high and the tax code is too complicated. Right. And then we go to the origins of the Tea Party. This is from a book called Poison Tea, How the Big Oil and Tobacco and Big Tobacco Invented the Tea Party and Captured the GOP. Rich Fink, who was Charles Koch's political advisor, said that basically what they needed was an extensive network. Well, here, over the years, Rich Fink, Charles Koch's political advisor, and his various Koch proteges have occasionally talked publicly about what it would be needed to take over one of the two national political parties from the outside and place libertarian free market principles at its center. It would take, number one, an extensive academic network to support it intellectually. Number two, policy networks in every state to draw on that intellectual underpinning from hundreds of American universities. Number three, a true political grassroots alliance that extended to all of those state capitals and worked closely with the academic and policy network. And number four, a propaganda arm that could bring tightly controlled messaging and narratives to the fore in the state networks in a way that looked like independent journalism. And surprise, surprise, they put it together. Back to Jeff Nesbitt's book, Poison Tea. According to publicly available IRS records, the 5 essential pillars of just such a Tea Party movement network were all funded and in place by the spring of 2009. You had the Sam Adams Alliance to direct grassroots efforts. You had the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity to direct propaganda efforts in state capitals. You had the State Policy Network to coordinate funding and free market policies at state-based think tanks. You had hundreds of grants from the Koch foundations to American universities that were linked through SPN. And, of course, CSE's successor, Americans for Prosperity, built to coordinate the effort nationally. The only thing missing from this link, in my opinion, is Fox so-called news. All of them, back to the book, all of them saw their budgets expand significantly as Obama ran for the White House and then took office, months or even a full year before the Tea Party movement erupted into public view. This explains why the Tea Party movement was able to mobilize, spread, and network so rapidly as if by magic. So now you've got Republicans who loved the Tea Party, even though, and this is from the New York Times by Frank Rich, it was titled The Billionaires Bankrolling the Tea Party. He writes, FreedomWorks, which was like Americans for Prosperity, is promoting events in Washington this week. Under its original name, Citizens for a Sound Economy, FreedomWorks received $12 million of its own from Koch family foundations. Using tax records, Jane Mayer found that Koch-controlled foundations gave out $196 million from 1998 to 2008, much of it to conservative causes and institutions. That figure doesn't include $50 million in Koch Industries lobbying and $4.8 million in campaign contributions by its Political Action Committee, putting it first among energy company peers like ExxonMobil and Chevron. So they loved the AstroTurf, phony baloney Tea Party. But now you've got Republican lawmakers. Senator John Kavanaugh of Arizona says he wants to bring racketeering charges against some protesters. In Minnesota, sponsors of a bill saying, if you kill a protester with your car, no problem. They say the measures are necessary to protect public safety on the highways. Still other bills. This is Christopher Ingraham's piece in the Washington Post on Friday. Still other bills in states like Oklahoma and South Dakota are intended to discourage protesting related to oil pipelines. Tell me this isn't becoming incredibly obvious what's going on here? It's bizarre. Keith Ellison lost to Tom Perez, the leadership of the DNC over the weekend. Tom Perez quickly reached out to Keith and brought him in as deputy chair. Keith Ellison, said, we don't have the luxury of being divided.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I agree with Keith on that. We'll see where this goes.
We'll talk about it a little more as the day goes on. We'll be back. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Thomas in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Thomas, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. So my point is to the Tom Perez being named the DNC chair.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like for at least me as a progressive, this shows an extreme lack of respect coming from the establishment side of the Democratic Party. I'm sure Keith Ellison wasn't like the perfect candidate, but he was. I feel personally that he was better than Perez. Perez has deep connections to the establishment wing of the party, and he even went back on his word. Originally, he said, yes, the DNC was playing favorites during the primaries, and then went back after, and then he said, I talked to some of my friends, and then I realized I misspoke.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I heard you a little bit earlier, but why should the progressive wing of the party stick with the Democrats, or at least the establishment Democratic Party, knowing that it seems that the establishment doesn't, at least don't respect that wing of the party?
The thing that I find amazing about this, Thomas, is that apparently the thing that pushed Perez over the top was President Obama personally calling voting members of the DNC and lobbying them to vote for Perez instead of Ellison. That's what pushed him over the top. It took 2 votes to make it happen. Had the president not intervened, in all probability, Keith Ellison would be chairing the DNC right now, from everything that I'm reading, or from much of what I'm reading. And, you know, so what we're seeing, in my opinion, is the last gasp of the Democratic Leadership Council and the Third Way. We're seeing the Democratic establishment, that part of the Democratic establishment that does not want to hold banksters accountable, and that's Barack Obama. And I realize, you know, a lot of people get offended when anybody criticizes President Obama. He was a good man in a lot of ways, and he was our first black president, which is a huge thing for the African-American community. But the fact of the matter is that he was a DLC Democrat, just like Bill Clinton was. And that whole group's time has passed. It didn't work, the experiment of bringing in corporations, being nice to the banks. And frankly, I knew that Perez was going to win when the day before the DNC voted to continue allowing lobbyists to be the voting members of the DNC and to continue taking their money. And at that point, I was like, okay, you know, the leadership of this party is going to go with the DLC and the Third Way. So, you know, which is it's still not the Republican Party. I mean, there's a lot that we can agree with corporate Democrats on, you know, social issues, things like that. It's just the main economic issues we're not going to agree with them on. But I think that what we have to do is take the party back. It's, you know, I mean, FDR Democrats, LBJ Democrats need to take the party back from the Bill Clinton Democrats. It's really that simple. And we damn near did it here. And that's working from the top down. And had, like I said, had the ultimate top, the president, the former president of the United States himself not intervened, we would have done it. But now we've got to do it from the bottom up, which means that you, Thomas, should go to your local Democratic Party in Philadelphia and say, how do I get into this thing? How do I end up being one of those people who votes on who the next DNC chair is? You know, let me in. You know, to just simply discard the Democratic Party is, you know, it's just not practical. Thomas, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day,
every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to air some dirty laundry. Part of the vote was pushed because he was a Muslim and because he supported Palestinians, and I really find that, very unsavory.
You're talking about the vote for the DNC chair, and you're talking about Tom Perez getting voted in over Keith Ellison. Chaim Sabin, I think is his name, the big
and
pro-Israeli Democratic donor. He was lobbying against him because Keith is a Muslim.
And Keith Ellison would not be in Congress if it wasn't for the Somali community here. I would say in Minneapolis they're the biggest voting bloc and the biggest supporters of the Democratic Party. But you're absolutely right. It's going to happen. The change in the party is going to happen from the bottom and it's already happening with the support of Our Revolution, because we have had a lot of upsets with traditional Democratic candidates who have been pushed out by one was Omar. I can't remember her first name. She's a state legislator now, and she pushed out a person that had been a DFL Khan, I think her name was, for like 35 years. And then also in my own city council race, we have a person that is most likely going to, I would say, win hands down, because she's going with issues that attract people across the board, and that's the $15 an hour now campaign here.
Yeah.
She supports it. That's on the top of her list of things to accomplish. So I support her. I'm getting involved with her campaign, and and then also there are a lot of people through Our Revolution that are caucusing in the DFL caucus in April, and they are going to be in for a big surprise. But I just don't get it, because actually, it's always been the progressive wing of the party that has brought most people in and has, really energized the Democratic Party.
Right. What I'm guessing Bill Clinton would tell you was that's all well and good, but the progressive wing of the party doesn't bring in the money we need to win elections, and that's why we need to get into bed with the banksters.
I have an answer to that. Because Bernie raised as much money, if not more, than Hillary Clinton by doing by a small donation.
No, I get it. And my point that President Obama was actually lobbying individual Democratic DNC voters, and that appears to be one of the big factors in pushing Tom Perez over the top. That's his right. But I think that this, if the Democratic Party is going to survive, it has to get more progressive. It's got to go from the bottom up. Thanks, Jim.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back in just a minute. And I am taking the position that Jim DeMint took relative to Barack Obama, and frankly, that Donald Trump took relative to Barack Obama. Donald Trump spent 8 years saying Barack Obama was an illegitimate president, that he didn't even have the right to be president. That was Donald Trump's position, and he did not swerve or sway from it. And even at the, even during the campaign, he was saying, well, okay, yeah, he was born here, but I have this horrible feeling that the Democrats are going to say, oh, finally we can help the country. Because Democrats love to help the country, right? They're,
most Democrats, I mean, that's the whole point of the Democratic Party. We're here for the people. We're here for the country. And so if Donald Trump wants to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure, you know, Obama desperately wanted to do that. The Republicans filibustered it. It actually passed Congress. The Republicans filibustered it. And so why, by the way? They did that so that people would be seriously pissed off at the Democrats and at the president. And it worked. Now, the question is, will it work? Because it worked because of a complicit media. Every single time the Republicans filibustered something that the Democrats passed that was actually good for America, the long-term extension of unemployment. You know, unemployment was extended for, you know, they wanted to extend it for another year during the crisis back in 2009, 2010. You would think any rational person would be in favor of that. The Republicans filibustered it in the Senate. Nancy Pelosi got it out of the House. And by the way, it got more than 50 votes in the Senate, so according to the Constitution, it passed. But the Republicans filibustered it. So was the headline in the New York Times, Republicans block long-term extension of unemployment? No. You know, I don't remember the exact headline, but the story at the time was that, you know, long-term extension of unemployment fails to get enough votes to pass the Senate. Now, my guess is, given how good the Republicans are at manipulating and owning the media, basically, I mean, literally owning it, but also in controlling, you know, what it says and how it does it by virtue of intimidation. My guess is that they will, if the Democrats do an obstructionist strategy for 4 years, like the Republicans have for the last 8, my guess is the media will call it out, whereas they refused to call it out when Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and you know, Mr. Drunk before him were doing that. But in fact, you know, this hit me over the weekend. I was watching one of the shows, and they had, like, you know, I think they had Jane Sanders on, and the question was, it was Wolf Blitzer, and he said, you know, is your husband going to run for president in 4 years? And she said, Wolf, that's the wrong question. The question should be, what are we going to do for working people? What are we going to do to bring jobs back to the United States? What are we going to do to, you know, and I'm doing this from memory, so this may not be what she said, but it was in that vein, right? What are we going to do to bring families together? What are we going to do to make sure everybody gets health care? And Wolf, you know, and had I been Wolf, my answer to that would have been, okay, what are we going to do? But he didn't want to go there. And it suddenly hit me. I had been wondering throughout this election, why is it that the media refuses to discuss issues? For a year and a half, this campaign has been going on, and the media has consistently refused. Most people have no idea what Paul Ryan intends to do. They have no idea. They have no idea what the issues are. Why? I think it's because whenever an issue is discussed, the issues, of course, reflect poorly on the Republicans, because all across America, the vast majority of Americans agree with the Democrats and the Democratic Party. And the media strategists in the Republican Party want to make sure that the American people don't know what the Republican Party's actual plans are, what they've actually done in the past. And so you've got these groups that come out, and every time one of the media organizations actually talks about the issues, they trash them. They trash them mercilessly. And so the media has gotten so shell-shocked over the last 20 years that this has been going on that they're afraid to discuss issues. Instead, they just discuss personality. Remember how Bernie used to go on TV and they would ask him about, you know, well, what do you think about Hillary Clinton's favorability like? And he'd say, it's irrelevant. Let's talk about the issues. And it used to really upset the, you know, poor Wolf Blitzer, right? Because he's been cowed. Well, he's been cowed not to talk about the issues when there's a Democrat in power. Will he talk about the issues when there's a Republican in power? Somehow I doubt it. But will he go after the Democrats? Somehow I think so.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You know, when Obama was elected, Rush Limbaugh said, "I hope he fails." I'm saying the same thing about Trump. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Donald Trump saying Americans hate Obamacare. Actually, not so much. But now we know, at least probably know, the outlines of Trump and the Republicans' proposal to deal with the so-called crisis in Obamacare. I say so-called crisis because it was created by Marco Rubio. If you just plug in to a search engine Marco Rubio and risk corridors and the word Obamacare, the New York Times article that lays all this out will pop right up. And it's from a year ago. And about a year ago, what Marco Rubio did, well, let me back up a little bit. When they put together Obamacare, there was concern that if we say to the insurance companies, you have to insure people even if they're sick, because the insurance companies have been saying to sick people, once you get sick, they drop your coverage, called rescission. And if you're already sick, they won't sell you coverage. So when you say to those insurance companies, sorry, you're going to have to pay for these sick people, they're going to lose money, at least for the first 5 years or so, until kind of all the sick people are in the system and everybody else is in the system, and it all kind of washes out. So for the first, I think it was the first decade, it might have been the first 10 years of Obamacare, there was this thing called risk corridors. And what they did was basically said, if you, insurance company, if you, Aetna, United Healthcare, whatever it may be, if you lose money in any particular year on Obamacare, operating under the rules that we've defined, we'll make up your loss. So it was a subsidy to the big insurance companies. It was a subsidy. It was largely paid for with a tax on people who make over $400,000 a year. A small tax, but, on lots of money. So Marco Rubio inserted into the budget bill last year, the omnibus budget bill, this little rider that blew up the risk corridors. Well, once those risk corridors are gone, health insurance companies immediately started losing money. And as soon as they started losing money, they started raising their rates so that they could make money because they had to make back that government subsidy. That law took effect. The U.S. budget takes effect October 1st every year. We operate in a fiscal year, October 1st to September 31st. So on October 1st of last year, 1 month and 1 week before the election, and the insurance companies saw this coming, they lost their government subsidies and they started raising their rates. And of course, the Republicans went into the election going, look at that, Aetna just raised their rates 35% in state so-and-so. Yeah, Red Cross, Blue Cross Blue Shield just raised their rates 10%, and so, et cetera, et cetera. And Rubio set this thing up. With the help of a bunch of other Republicans, of course, but it was principally Marco Rubio's efforts. As I said, Google it. Just plug in Marco Rubio risk corridors and Obamacare. It pops right up. This was intentional. This was put into place a year in advance to blow up. This was an October surprise, to blow up October 1st, 2016, just before the elections. And it did, and it worked. So now without the risk corridors, you've got health insurance companies that are saying, we can't afford this. You've got some states that are only going to have one insurance company. This really and truly is Obamacare in a crisis, caused by Republicans, mostly Marco Rubio. So what do we know about this repeal and replacement of ACA that Donald Trump is talking about? Well, for the people who are really rich, here's what they're going to get. They're going to get a major tax cut of $346 billion over the next decade, because those risk corridors and other parts of Obamacare were being funded by actually raising taxes on rich people. So the very well off, they're going to see a $346 billion tax cut. If they have a health savings account, or even if they're uninsured, no longer have to pay a penalty, and they get a bigger tax shelter for their health savings account. They're going to get a brand new subsidy to buy insurance. Everybody, including Bill Gates and the Koch brothers, everybody's going to get money from the federal government. 50% of all the tax cut benefits from repealing Obamacare are going to go to just exclusively to millionaires, people who earn over $1 million a year. And there will be a $10 billion cut to pay for pharmaceuticals, to pay for alternative health plans, to pay for medical devices and things like that. Now, if you're in the middle class, that's what rich people get. If you're in the middle class, this is what you get. Your subsidy to buy insurance will decline from the average of 57%, will decline an average of 57%, from $6,300, which is the average subsidy that you're getting right now, to $2,700. So you're going to lose about $4,000 a year that you can use to buy insurance with. The subsidies will no longer be tied to income, geography, or as premiums rise. So, if you live in a high, like in Alaska, health insurance costs about twice what it does on the continental United States. Tough luck. Major premium increases will happen to people between 55 and 64 years old, because that will allow them to reduce premium rates on younger, healthier people. The tax increase on employee benefits that you get right now, the benefits are likely to be reduced, and millions are going to lose coverage. That's for the middle class. For the working class and seniors in nursing homes, the Medicaid expansion is going to be reduced by $277 billion. This is about a 40% cut, which means most states are going to drop Medicaid, or at least the Medicaid expansion. There'll be a $370 billion cut to the core of Medicare over 10 years to pay for that tax cut for billionaires, which means that really poor people are going to get screwed. And Medicaid will be block granted and capped forever, which means that every year, as expenses go up, the amount of money in Medicaid goes down, millions are going to lose coverage, and the coverage you have is going to be less and less consequential and useful. And for everyone, this is, by the way, from AmericanProgress.org, and for everyone, sicker people can be charged more if they have a gap in coverage. 10 essential benefit protections will disappear, including mental health. And the Prevention and Public Health Fund, which is 12% of the CDC's budget, this is going to be eliminated. So get ready to see, like serious diseases tracking, up. Not going to be a good thing. So anyhow, that's what's going on there. Chris in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Tom. Let me take out there.
Thank you.
There we go. I just, in your discussion about risk corridors, we had a company in Oregon called Moda. I mean, they had taken over another company, but they were our health insurer. And then I'm lucky I'm on Medicare like you, but my husband is younger. He needs individual insurance. And Moda withdrew. I think they actually went out of business. Mm-hmm. But I saw in the paper the other day they had sued the government because of the reneging on the promise that, Obama had made, that Congress had made. And they won. They won their lawsuit. So
does that mean, though, that the risk corridors have been repealed, or that they are going to be individually reimbursed, or that it's going to be appealed?
I think it just means that they are going to be individually reimbursed. And it probably, you're right, will be appealed. But it was just one company saying, hey, you guys made a promise that you didn't keep, and the courts agreed. So for whatever that's worth, but I wish more people knew. I mean, it's just an amazing thing that the Republicans are saying, oh, it's just falling apart. No, it isn't.
They killed it. And this is what Republicans always do. They defund programs, defund agencies to the point where they no longer, can even answer the phone. And then they say, hey, look at that. It's like they did this to the VA. Look at that. People are dying. This isn't working. We need to have free market solutions. We need to turn it over to the billionaires. It's sick and twisted. Chris, thank you for the call, and thanks for adding to the conversation. I appreciate it. Timothy in Chicago. Hey, Timothy, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I want to talk about food. Initially, I was going to talk about the triangulation and the failure of the Democratic Party, but I think local food. So with 10 years ago, and I know you know a lot about food, but 10 years ago, people weren't talking that much about food, but it seems like now there are more and more people that are saying, hey, all right, this conventional food system isn't working, and that drives the demand for local food, which is fantastic because then people learn the story behind it, they make connections, but it builds networks and it decentralizes power.
Right.
And it's like allows democracy to happen, and it's like something that the right and left, largely the people, can come together.
Yeah, and this is happening all over the country, Timothy. I mean, you know, here in Washington, D.C., there's a couple of, I think they're called CSAs. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically, you know, farm to home. You know, basically these local farmers get together, and every week you get a box of fruits and vegetables. And
that's right.
Community-supported agriculture. Thank you, Troy. Troy Miller tracked it down for us. And, you know, it's a really good thing. And you know, it's, in fact, I just got a flyer last week about a new one in our neighborhood. I mean, it's just, they're all over the place. And we're also seeing communities start community gardens. There's a bunch of them over in the southwest part of Washington, D.C., and some really poor neighborhoods are turning out some really spectacular community gardens, which is really great. Timothy, thanks for the call. And, you know, with regard to the corporate Democrats, yeah, I mean, this is just like we've got to rebuild the Democratic Party from the bottom up.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Very simple, very straightforward. We don't need to be bitter about it or grumpy about it. Let's be joyous about it and rebuild the Democratic Party. And welcome back. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, nice to talk to you again. I want to say Clinton put the Democratic Party on life support. Obama killed the Democratic Party, and now he's kind of mutilating the corpse at this point with the election of Tom Perez. And just for FYI, I didn't even support Keith Ellison. I actually supported Sam Ronan, I think his name is, who ran for the DNC. I think he would have made an excellent DNC chair.
Yeah.
But that's all moot now at this point.
Yeah.
And I think that there's no hope for the Democratic Party anymore. I agree with
strongly disagree,
Cornel
Jared.
West.
Yeah,
Jimmy Dore.
Cornel West has been trashing the Democratic Party forever, and if there's no hope for the Democratic Party, it will be because people like you don't show up, Jared. Here you've got this billion-dollar nonprofit that you can actually become a part of the leadership of. It's wide open. I realize some people in some parts of the country have tried to get into the Democratic Party, and they encounter, you know, a crusty resistance from the old guard. Well, the old guard's not going to live forever, number one. And number two, if you show up with enough people, you can even overwhelm the old guard. I just, you know, this whole making the good making the perfect the enemy of the good seems like a bad path to take to me. Tom Perez. You know, I was not a supporter of Tom Perez. I'm not but hey, he's the chair of the DNC now, and I get it that he's there because Barack Obama put him there, basically, and you know, lobbied individual DNC members to vote for him before the election, which pushed him over the top. I think Keith Ellison had a lot of momentum, but you know, 90% of the policies that he espouses are identical to Keith Ellison's, as far as I can tell. In fact, I'm not even sure where the 10% change is. And Tom Perez was the most liberal member of Obama's cabinet. He was on this show a number of times as labor secretary, and you know, an outspoken defender of labor and the right to unionize. And he gets it. So I don't see this as a terrible thing. I see this as a setback. But you know, think about this, Jared. 8 years ago, there would have been no way that you could even have any discussion about a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the Clintons so completely owned the Democratic Party that, you know, even to challenge the orthodoxy, I would do shows about the DLC here on this program and get all kinds of crap from Democrats saying, oh, how dare you, you know, speak ill of the Democratic Party. I say, I'm not speaking ill of it. I'm saying this is what's happened, and they're not going to start winning elections until they go back to their FDR roots. And the proof of that is that about 1,000 seats were lost during the 8 years of the Obama presidency. And you know, I was right. Keith Ellison was right. But I think that Tom Perez has the ability to carry that torch. He's the first Hispanic to lead the DNC. That's a good thing. I mean, you know, let's find the positive pieces of this and move forward on it. We're not going to control it from the top down. We need to control it from the bottom up, and that means we need to get in the game. Jared, thank you for the call. And I honor and appreciate your perspective. I respectfully dissent. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Morning, David.
Hold on, I'm going to take you off the speakerphone, my friend.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to slightly change the topic from the DOC, but it's going to kind of tie in, I hope. Can you hear me?
Sure, just fine.
Yeah. So what I called in on was in this climate of the First Amendment, the press being under attack, and it's fake news that Trump is pushing to, you know, to get his agenda out there without, you know, scrutiny or whatnot. I would like to veer off a little bit. And in this climate where the First Amendment and the press is at the forefront of his attacks, I would like for us who do things like come to you and other means of information, not to be too quick to come to the defense of what we have in the way of the corporate press. I mean, you can look at your local news, and I mean, it's like infotainment. This is a local news. You look at the national news or the so-called cable news, and it's and I don't think you could call it news. And this is what passes off for the First Amendment. I mean, if you look at some of the local news, you can't even call it that.
Yeah, it's car wrecks and puppies.
Yes, I mean it's total
But
mind-numbing.
if you look at the national news, David, what you'll find is that there's basically 5 stories that get recycled hour after hour after hour all day long. And you want to have a really shocking experience on your TV, go to Agence France Presse or RT or Al Jazeera or BBC, any of the international press, and just watch them for a half hour. And you'll discover that there's all kinds of stuff going on in the world that's really important and consequential. And then you go back to American news, and it's the same 5 stories recycled over and over. And they're all safe for corporate, for corporate interests. So pardon my interrupting you, David.
But you make the point. These are some of my sources amongst others. But this is telling. And so in this climate where the so-called First Amendment and the corporate press is pretty much on the defensive, I think it's high time that we really begin to start looking at the press as a failed service and system to the American people. And so in that context, it is fake news. It is nonsense that we need in this society. And I can bet you $10 to a donut, the people that look at you and all of those other sources are the citizens who are really active. And they're that way because the information, it prompts us to get up off our ass, excuse my language, get up off our butts to do something about the information that we are ingesting.
Yeah.
But this nonsense that is, I mean, if this is not a perfect time to just say, this is not the First Amendment.
Right.
This is not freedom of speech.
Right. On the one hand, I don't want to hand Donald Trump a propaganda victory by agreeing with him about the lying press or the fake news press, what Hitler referred to as the Lügen press, the lying press. On the other hand, you're absolutely right, David, in your analysis. And in fact, I wrote a critique of the press that I submitted to Alternet last week called America's Lugan Press Problem. I'm not sure if it'll appear with that same headline. And I think they're going to post it live this week, I'm assuming. And, pointed out that we've got a bunch of television networks that, refuse to talk about net neutrality because their parent companies are suing to destroy net neutrality. Refuse to talk about corporate mergers because their parent companies are in the middle of a corporate merger. Refuse to talk about wealth concentration because they represent the wealth concentration. And if we don't look at this with a cold eye and say, Reagan doing away with the Fairness Doctrine, and the Republicans and Bill Clinton doing, with the Telecommunications Act and 1,000 other paper cuts via the FCC about rules having to do with local ownership of media, if we don't start reversing some of these policies of the last 30, 40 years that have destroyed our media, then we're going to end up with we're already there, with bread and circus press that just keeps us entertained and does nothing else. David, I got to move along, but thank you for your call. Very well said. Ray in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I would just like to remind you that the Democrats gained 2 seats in the Senate and is it 5 or 6 seats in the House of Representatives? And I always point that out to my people that, actually the Democrats did pretty good nationally, except for of course, we actually won the popular vote. So
right.
That's a good.
No, the Democratic Party is not dead. People are like, this is the corporate media narrative, but the Democratic Party is far from dead.
Exactly. And that's what I remind everybody, But it's not. You don't ever hear it on TV.
Yeah.
That we did gain 2 seats and 6 seats.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ray. Ray, thanks a lot for the reality check. I appreciate it. Colleen in Louisville, Kentucky. Hey, Colleen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. I'm a recent listener. I just discovered your broadcast very recently, and I very much appreciate the
great. Welcome.
That you're passing on.
Thank you.
Yes, we just finished. I'm from Louisville, the home of Mitch McConnell, and we just finished a week of trying to track Mitch down. He only appeared at paid venues, and those of us who wanted and invited him to come out and meet with us, he refused to do so. He actually, let me give you Friday night's example. Police were very present. We were relegated to the opposite side of the road, traffic going back and forth, and he actually had motorcycle club, Hells Angels there, working with the police to make sure that we didn't get near.
Wow.
And, yeah.
So the brown shirts were out.
Yeah. Very disturbing. We were not in a safe place. We went ahead with our rally, but it was obvious everything was roped off, and it was obvious the police were more concerned about, I guess, us rushing Mitch McConnell, which wasn't going to happen. But he's, if you paid to go into one of his meetings and you stood up and politely disputed what he was saying, you were escorted out.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
This happened throughout the entire state.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell is the ultimate plutocrat, as is his wife, Elaine Chao, who is now inside Donald Trump's cabinet. Good on you, Colleen, for showing up. That's marvelous. And, keep at it. Eventually, this too shall pass. I appreciate your call, and thank you for following our program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction, a book about extinction. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in our atmosphere, trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000-year history of the human race. We are on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a very different place from the one currently cradling us. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, and agricultural collapse, they're all taking place right now. And it's going to get worse. But now other voices have entered the fray. Those of geologists who study the longer-term implications and histories of a planet undergoing rapid global warming. Specifically, they are focused on extinctions. The climate scientists, geologists, and those from related scientific disciplines need to continue talking to each other because at some point we may be able to see the critical moment in which the current climate crosses from the realm of a global destabilizer to a global extinction event. We must wake up. It's hard to imagine life without Earth. We take the vast variety of life on this planet and even our own existence for granted. But numerous times in our planet's history, life as we know it has come close to disappearing entirely. We call these events mass extinctions, and we even teach school children about those times of great death on our planet. For example, we know that long ago, on a much more unstable planet, the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid striking the Earth. This leads many people to believe that as long as we don't see an asteroid hurtling toward the planet, all is well. But this is not rational thinking for several reasons. The asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs and started a major mass extinction is the only event having to do with outer space that we can trace with any certainty. And new science indicates that the asteroid impact itself wasn't what killed the dinosaurs. It was the global warming that followed it. New science has discovered a common theme in all of the extinctions in the past, and it's woven right into the global fabric of today as yet another mass extinction threatens our planet. That global consistent thread is global warming. We have had 6 extinctions in the billion-year history of life on our planet. Each sharp spike in the chart below indicates one of these mass extinctions. There's a chart on the page. Occurring about 450 million years ago, the Ordovician/Silurian mass extinction devastated marine life, which at the time dominated the planet. In a series of 2 extinctions, 60 and 70% of all life on the planet was taken, respectively. Then, fewer than 100 million years later, the planet was rocked again. The Denovian period was capped off by a 20 million year death march that killed off 70% of life on Earth. This included many coral reefs, which didn't return for another 100 million years. We know of the KT extinction, the Cretaceous-Tertiary extinction, which occurred 65 million years ago, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. There was also an extinction event 200 million years ago, known as the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. But none of these extinctions explains the huge spike shown in the center of the previous chart. That one happened 250 million years ago and was the worst mass extinction of species event in the history of our planet. It was the extinction of all extinctions, referred to as the Great Dying. The Permian mass extinction took out at least 95% of all life on the planet in fewer than 100,000 years, an instant in geological time. Professor Paul Wignall of the University of Leeds and an expert on mass extinctions told me that the Permian was the greatest crisis that life on Earth has ever suffered. Only in the past 2 decades has the cause of the Permian extinction been understood. It was speculated that an asteroid impact may have been the trigger, but more recent research by Professor Wignall, geologists, and other scientists around the world have revealed the true trigger came from deep within the Earth. The Permian mass extinction was initiated by a colossal flow of lava in an area of what is now Siberia. That was the trigger, but not the killer. The killer was under the water and under the ice, where trillions of tons of greenhouse gases, largely derived from carbon, and frozen in the form of crystalline methane, lay in wait. Thus, global warming is the force behind the death of nearly everything on the planet during the Permian mass extinction. That point is well illustrated. You can again see the spikes of mass extinctions measured by the increase in global temperatures, with the largest spike representing the Permian mass extinction. Wignall told me, there have been a lot of disasters and crises in the geological past. It's interesting to study them because they may have a comparison to today. He added, I think it is certainly extremely significant that a lot of the main crises of the past are associated with global warming, with obvious implications for the present day. The 6th mass extinction may even rival the speed and intensity of the Great Permian mass extinction, but the 6th is not represented on either of the 2 previous charts. That's because it's the one happening today, right now, all around us. And then we go on to document how the burning of fossil fuels is throwing an amount of carbon into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that's relatively similar to what happened with that giant volcanic eruption in Siberia 250 million years ago with the Permian mass extinction, and how it could be leading to a major extinction event. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Peter Schrag wrote a piece for the American Prospect that is troubling. It's interesting. I wrote several pieces about this in 2002, 2001, and 2002 when George W. Bush became president. About the Reichstag fire. I saw at that time Bush's authoritarian tendencies and his willingness to lie and use war as a political weapon. And he was pretty upfront about it. I mean, it's what he told his biographer and everything else. And I was very worried that he was the guy, that was really going to take us down, take our country down. He's the guy who really damaged our country, George W. Bush, arguably the worst president in the history of the United States. He lied us into another war the same way LBJ lied us into Vietnam, the same way McKinley lied us into the Spanish-American War for political purposes and to benefit his donors. But Donald Trump is now occupying the White House, and this is something. Today is the anniversary of the fire in 1933, on February 27th, 1933. This day in history, as it were, is the day that Marius van der Lubbe was, according to some historians, taken through an underground tunnel into the Reichstag-Gebäude, into the Parliament building. And, and there were all these tapestries hanging in the walls, and basically just lit them on fire, which then, proceeded to light the building on fire. William L. Scherer, in his book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which is still the most authoritative book on the history of Hitler's Germany, even though William Scherer is no longer with us. He said there was enough evidence to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that it was the Nazis who planned the arson and carried it out for their own political ends. So Peter Schrag then, in his piece for the American Prospect, the headline, "Could There Be an American Reichstag Fire? Don't Underestimate Trump." The headline kind of gives it away. This is reposted over at alternate.org. Within hours of the fire. Now, in the piece that I wrote back in 2001 or so for Common Dreams, which got reprinted in my book, We the People, I pointed out that Hitler had been dining with, as I recall, von Papen, might have been Bismarck. It was one of those guys. He was dining with the guy who was the president of the Republic. He was the chancellor, sort of like president and prime minister. The prime minister's the actual guy who has the power. Hitler had the power. Might have been Hindenburg, in fact. In any case, he was having dinner with this guy, and he got word that the Reichstag was on fire, and it was just several blocks away. He ran down the street to this place and got in front of a radio microphone. Back then, you know, everybody listened to the radio. This was before television, 1933. And said, "This fire is a sign from God." Seriously, Hitler said that. And so now to the history lesson, this, you know, from this piece by Peter Schrag in the American Prospect. Within hours of that fire, hundreds of people were arrested and put in protective custody or sent to concentration camps. And the next morning, in the words of Cambridge University historian Richard Evans, quote, "The cabinet, which still had a non-Nazi majority, met to draw up an emergency decree that abrogated civil liberties across Germany. Signed by President Hindenburg the same day," that would be tomorrow, would be the anniversary. Signed by President Hindenburg, it abolished freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association. And it abolished freedom of the press. It suspended the autonomy of federated states such as Baden and Bavaria, legalized phone tapping, the interception of correspondence, and other intrusions. Now, after 9/11, when the Patriot Act was proposed, I wrote a very similar article, drawing parallels between the enabling acts in 1933 of the Nazis and the Patriot Act. But continuing with this article by Peter Schrag, the decree was the first of two major measures that eliminated all institutional checks and gave Hitler absolute dictatorial powers. The second, passed a month later by the Reichstag, by the parliament, gave Hitler plenary power, the power to enact laws without any action from the parliament whatsoever. Quoting Evans again, quote, "The Nazis used them to bludgeon their opponents into submission and their allies into compliance. By the summer of 1933, all opposition had been crushed. More than 100,000 communists, social democrats, and other opponents of the Nazis had been sent to concentration camps. All independent political parties had been forced to dissolve themselves, and the Nazi dictatorship had been firmly established." And let me remind you, in the fall of 1933, in the face of this, 1 million people assembled in the streets of Berlin to protest Hitler. What good did it do them? Not a whole lot. It faded out. It's like people said, well, you know, okay, he's got that power now. Okay, Trump's got that power now. Now, obviously, we're not the same thing as Germany. But, you know, could we be? The author of this piece in Alternate says, "But as a refugee from Hitler, class of 41, I'm too much aware of the extent to which the Nazis were underestimated as low-class clowns and thugs until it was too late. Similarly, in the past election, the media, the pollsters, the Democrats, and millions of other Americans, and not just the left, also underestimated Trump. In that context, I'm reminded of Hannah Arendt's post-war observation that, quote, in 1933, indifference was no longer possible. It was no longer possible even before that." And then he says, we have troubling signs. The willingness of the Republican leadership in Congress to excuse Trump's arrogant contempt for conflict of interest laws and ethical standards. Its spineless refusal to call for an independent investigation of the links between Trump and his people with the Kremlin. The administration's draft memo on activation of members of the State National Guard and the apprehension, investigation, and detention of aliens in the United States. Trump's call for extreme vetting of Muslims. the attacks on Mexican immigrants as criminals and rapists, the vastly broadened deportation criteria, accepting only the dreamers, the America First mantra in favor of isolationists, anti-Semites, and Nazi sympathizers in the years before Pearl Harbor, the invocation of alternative facts, Trump's attacks on the courts and so-called judges, and the media as the enemy of the people. John McCain, yes, Republican Senator John McCain, said, when you look at history, the first thing dictators do is shut down the press. So, you know, he goes on through this. But could there be a Reichstag fire in the United States? And what do you do with this piece, Igor Bobek over at the Huffington Post, the first 100 lies, the Trump team's flurry of falsehood. The president and his aides succeeded in reaching the mark, 100 lies in only 36 days. And then they go through and list them. You know, every single one of Trump's lies, which is, you know, a pretty startling, it's a damn startling list, 100 lies in 36 days. And, you know, and the big problem, the big mistake that the press makes is that they'll repeat a Trump lie and then say, but that's not true. But in order to repeat it, you've got to, you know, when you hear the thing repeated, you have to form it as a positive in your mind before you can turn it into a negative. We need to change the way we're reporting on Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Boy, what a day. Charlie, watching Free Speech TV in Hermiston, Oregon. Hey, Charlie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, this is a simple one for you, and then I'll just hang up after I ask the question. A lot of people don't read history. I'm a little concerned with that, but that's nothing new. Could you please go back and discuss with the people what the Dodd-Frank Act is and why they want to repeal it, and go back further. We'll go into the Glass-Steagall Act, why that was put in, how, when, where, and now that Dodd-Frank is on the chopping block, what's that going to mean to the American people, especially the middle class that don't have much money but are trying to save for retirement and will, no doubt, lose it all again. Could you go into that? Thank you, and goodbye.
Sure. Thank you, Charlie. Okay, let's start in 1921. William Harding is elected president of the United States, and on a platform of less business and government, less government in business, more business in government. In other words, deregulate and privatize. He radically deregulates the banks and the investment houses, and which in many cases are one and the same. And he cuts the top tax rate from 91% down to 25%. So all this hot money starts flowing into the system. The stock market begins to explode. The banksters are making a killing. This continues until 1929. The economy is booming for everybody except working people. People at the top were making a fortune. Poverty, though, was actually increasing during that period of time, just as it has during the Reagan bubbles, the Clinton bubbles, and the Obama bubble. And I don't think you can call the Obama administration a bubble, but maybe the later Bush bubble. So you got that. And then it all crashed in 1929, and people looked around and said, why did this crash? Well, the obvious reason, the banksters were playing all kinds of games. People were allowed to gamble on stock, putting down 5 or 10% on margin. And, you know, when the margin calls came, when the stock started going down, they couldn't afford to pay off their margin calls. They couldn't, you know, pay for the entirety of their debt, of their stock, and so they ended up going bankrupt. And so the answer to that in 1933 was, okay, let's separate the investment banking, which can be toxic and destructive when the economy goes south, from checkbook banking, which, you know, is a fairly stable, boring business. And these are referred to as investment banks and commercial banks. And the thing that provided the main impetus for this was that the week before, the first week of March in 1933, the week before Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated, and Congress moved the inauguration up from March all the way to January as a result of this exact incident. that week, the week before he was inaugurated, every bank in America failed. So there was like no banking infrastructure left when FDR came into office. And so they passed the Glass-Steagall Act, which said the banks will never fail again. They're going to be tightly regulated, and they are not going to be allowed to gamble. And the gambling banks are going to be clearly identified as gambling banks, as you know, places to put your money. And that was Glass-Steagall. Now, the Glass-Steagall got knocked down in either 99 or 2000 with the what was the bill? With that piece of legislation. And then we had another crash 8 years later. So trying to respond to that crash, a half measure was placed forward. This was Dodd-Frank, which was, if we can't split off the investment bank con artists from the banking, at least we can regulate them and we can protect the American people from them. That regulation, that protection is what the Republicans have in their crosshairs right now. And it'll just take us back to the Great Depression. Thanks, Charlie.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So do you think that it's possible we could have a Reichstag fire, or are we witnessing one in slow motion right now? Because all the Reichstag fire did was provided Hitler with an enemy. Marius van der Lubbe was defined as a communist. He was Dutch. He was a young man from Holland who was probably schizophrenic or possibly profoundly mentally retarded or in some other way mentally disabled. And he was maneuvered by the Nazis into burning the Parliament building so that they could say, oh, yeah, this guy is a communist. You know, sort of like Lee Oswald, right? Joining the American Communist Party and trying to go to Cuba, you know, and all that kind of stuff. Yes, we need a patsy. Well, that's what they did. They got their patsy in Marius van der Lubbe. And it provided Hitler with an instant, okay, the communists are after us. We need to crush the communists. And their fellow travelers, the Social Democrats, what today we would call the Democratic Party. And the communists would have been, I guess, the Bernie-crats and the Greens. We got to crush them. And along with them, we have to crush the news media. We have to destroy its credibility. We have to shut down the presses. We have to lock these people up. And then they went from there after the labor unions. They went after the church. They went after basically any place where resistance could be organized, the universities. And then, you know, finally, although the Jews had been their favorite scapegoats all along in this, you know, finally the final solution, so-called. But what if it's actually happening right now as we look around? I mean, you've got the President of the United States discrediting the press, saying that the press is fake news, is the lying press, using basically Hitler's phrase, Lügenpresse, Lügenpresse. We have the President of the United States saying this. We have the hyping of every single attack in the United States by anybody whose skin is dark or who is Muslim. Absolute hyping of it. And not just there. I mean, this is pervading our institutional memory. I wrote another article this weekend, and in it I wanted to talk about the killings of a number of African Americans. And I was looking at the Wikipedia site for Michael Brown. Now, when that cop killed Michael Brown, he had no idea that Michael Brown had snatched some cigarillos from a convenience store. He had no idea that Michael Brown had actually committed a crime. The crime that he was concerned about was a large young black man walking down the street rather than walking on the sidewalk. And basically shot him for that. But if you read the Wikipedia entry, the first couple of paragraphs are all about how Michael Brown was such a thug and was, robbing a convenience store and assaulting its owner. Well, that had nothing to do with the Michael Brown case. But hey, let's start out with character assassination. He's a black guy. This is happening. I mean, it's not just the right-wingers who are constantly rewriting Wikipedia. And I'm telling you, it's gotten pretty bad. Same thing with the Sandra Bland's site. I went to that site, and I was like, oh, my God, this has been rewritten by right-wingers. So we've got this incredibly divisive white power, white nationalist bunch, white supremacy bunch that are trying to rewrite our history. You've got their television networks, Fox so-called News, and their radio networks, right-wing hate radio all across the country, in every town in America, promoting these ideas that good white Americans should hate and fear people of color, people who are not Christian. Anybody who identifies themselves as liberal. Oh, my God. They want to tax the billionaires and use that money to pay for health care for poor people. We can't have that, because that's what Obamacare is, by the way. They raised taxes on billionaires and used it to pay for Medicaid. And Donald Trump is going to undo that because he's a friggin' billionaire. So are we watching our own version of the Reichstag fire happening in slower motion right in front of us? And will we see the apotheosis of that? Will we see the peak of that? Will we see the flowering of that tomorrow night at the State of the Union address? Who is Donald Trump going to tell us to hate? Who is Donald Trump going to tell us to fear? I guarantee it's not going to be the billionaire class that has been systematically taking this country apart over the last 35 years. I can virtually guarantee it's going to be people who are not Christian and whose skin is not white. And to a lesser extent, people who are not male. And this is, the slow motion Reichstag fire. It really concerns me. I mean, this really concerns me. I was looking around at Alexa numbers over the weekend at some of the progressive websites, and it looks like some numbers are starting to slide a little bit in the last couple of weeks. Why? Maybe people are just exhausted. I mean, Trump has been doing this blitzkrieg, the lightning attack, on everybody. We need to stay engaged. Fully engaged.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And we need to call this stuff out. I mean, they are working this thing as hard as they can, doing press conferences every day, getting it televised on all the networks. They are working hard. Did you see this thing? The scientists over at the Energy Department, they're scrambling to preserve the scientific data that they have. In fact, Jerry Brown, one of the things that was said during the campaign, or one of the incoming Trump people, is that they want to shut down the NASA satellites that are monitoring the temperature of the planet. Now, this is a variation on what Sam Brownback did in Kansas. Sam Brownback in Kansas said, we're going to do this great Reaganomics experiment. I still believe in Reaganomics, even though it's screwed the country. I think that it's real. This trickle-down economics, this theory, this crazy theory that Steve Moore and Alvin Lafler came up with I think it's real, and we're going to do this in Kansas, home of the Koch brothers. We're going to dramatically cut the taxes on our millionaires and billionaires in Kansas, which is going to drop the state revenue dramatically, and we're going to cut funding. We're going to cut spending in the state of Kansas. And so we're going to cut aid to education. We're going to cut aid to poor people. We're going to cut aid to, we're just going to right across the board. And you will see, as a result of these lower taxes and fewer regulations and less, welfare, as it were, you'll see that Kansas is going to become the most vibrant economy in the entire United States. And Sam Brownback even assigned a special office, a special guy in a special office to simply day-to-day keep track of the economic statistics, proving that his experiment was working. Well, that was 2 or 3 years ago. The experiment's been a disaster. Kansas, and Bobby Jindal was doing the same thing in Louisiana for a different reason. Brownback was doing it because he's an ideologue. Bobby Jindal was doing it because he wants to become president. And so he figured if he, and Reagan is the great god of the Republicans. So if he did Reaganomics in Louisiana, in a big way, that, Louisiana, at least he'd be able to campaign for president that he had done this thing. And he created such a disaster in Kansas that this incredibly red state elected a Democratic governor to replace him. I mean, they were so sick of it. But what Sam Brownback did in Kansas is when the news started coming down that the state was sinking and sinking and sinking, mortality rate was going up, deaths were going up, childhood diseases were going up, educational outcomes were going down, suicide was going up, homicide was going up, drug addiction was going up. You pick the measure of quality of life. They were all collapsing and are to this day in Kansas. And so what did Sam Brownback do? Did he say, gee, I guess this experiment isn't working. We should go back to the FDR stuff that actually has been proven to work? No. He fired the guy and closed the office who was keeping track of the statistics, and he took them off the state website. So now you've got climate change deniers coming into the Trump administration, and they're saying, they're trying to say, well, there's no such thing as climate change, and if there is, it's got nothing to do with people, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And how do we know about climate change? Well, one of the principal ways we know about it is NASA satellites that are measuring it, and ocean measuring stations all around the world. And so the guys coming into the Trump administration are saying, let's cut the funding for these programs. We don't need no stinking satellites. We don't need no stinking weather measurements. We know this stuff is just a lie. It's a hoax made up in China, to hurt American competitiveness. That's what Trump tweeted a couple of years back. And so, we'll just stop the satellites. So this is astonishing. Jerry Brown, the governor of California, he says, you guys do that? We'll launch our own satellites. Because climate change is affecting California in a big way, from wildfires to drought to, you name it, to loss of snowpack in the, what's that mountain range that runs through Southern California that is the main water source? In any case, there's a mountain range that runs there, and they have glaciers. And those glaciers, they build up in the winter and they melt down in the summer. They don't melt down to nothing, but you get snow melt in the summer. And, up near Truckee and all that part of California. And they've had so little snowfall that the glaciers are starting to vanish, and they're melting too. And when they finish melting, there will be no more water in the rivers, at least part of the year. And that's going to be a screaming disaster. And so Jerry Brown is like, if you guys aren't going to keep track of this, if you're not going to monitor what's going on, if you're not going to keep us safe, if you're not going to at least give us information to keep us safe, we will do it ourselves. But meanwhile, over at the Department of Energy, first of all, the Trump administration asked for a hit list of everybody at the Department of Energy. Rick Perry's going to run it now. Everybody at the Department of Energy who has anything to do with global warming at all, right? Have they been to a conference? Did they write a paper? Are they doing research? We want their names. And the DOE is saying, no, we're not going to give them to you. Now, after January 21st, they won't be able to say no anymore. But so far, they're saying no. And in the meantime, what they're doing is they're taking all that government data, and I'm not even sure this is legal. They're taking all this government data and they're stashing it on thumb drives and hard drives and whatnot to get it out of the building so that when the Trump administration comes in, we'll still have the data. It's amazing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's like, this is like the Catholic Church in Galileo. You know, it's like the earth is flat, the earth is the center of the universe. These are the people who've taken over the executive branch of government.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation. And it's free, and it's advertising free. HartmannReport.com. This, well, yeah, let's talk about the Reichstag fire. Chris in Limestone, Maine. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon. Appreciate your show and the clear-headed way you talk about stuff. And yes, indeed, I think that there is a real possibility that we're in for a tsunami of pain sometime soon. You've got all the structure that's being put in place for an incident to pop up.
Yeah, Donald Trump has been all but taunting ISIS. You know, we dare you, we dare you, we dare you.
Exactly. Now, how hard is it going to be for maybe not ISIS, but some sort of band of enthusiastic, Trump youth brigades? I wouldn't say that for sure, but some sort of individuals that are deluded and given access to what they need to create, let's say, some medicinal dirty bombs in different parts of the country all at once.
Well, apropos of that, you know, while Trump can keep people from Syria or from Iraq out of the country, or, you know, at least he can try, and I think he'll probably succeed at it, he can't keep them off our internet. And this is the area where we have had the biggest problem, was these so-called homegrown terrorists, people who got radicalized on the internet, have no contact with anybody. They're not part of any group. They're very hard to find. And if a couple of these folks inside the United States who are Muslim were to commit some horrible crime, like you said, say, you know, dirty bomb or something else, and there's so many ways to mess with a country, you know, or giant infrastructure damage, whatever it may be, then Trump would have his Reichstag fire, and it would be those god-awful brown people who aren't Christians.
Yes, but on that, I don't think it has to be a Muslim. It doesn't have to be anybody. It has to just be a Trump enthusiast that thinks he's doing God's work, and off he goes. And all of a sudden, the internet gets shut down under, you know, some sort of martial law, so we can't talk to each other anymore. You know, I mean, most of our political stuff happens over the internet, so that gets turned off. And then the phone calls, yeah, you can dial 911, but that'll be about it.
Yeah, and Ajit Pai at the head of the FCC is perfectly positioned to pull something like that off. He's already said he hates net neutrality. He's doing away with privacy protections. I mean, he's doing a bunch of stuff just by running the agency that has dialed back. People are completely unaware of this. It's amazing.
Yeah, and consider Mr. Bannon's words about an administrative deconstruction.
Right.
That sounds like something that happened in Berlin in 1945.
Well, it sounds like something that happened in Berlin in 1933. The German democratic state was unraveled. It was deconstructed and was replaced with an absolute rule fascistic state called the Nazi state.
Yeah, and you have all these people that are saying, at a White House government level, the things that they're saying. I mean, at first glance, you think they must be mad, but are they setting the stage of acceptance of, okay, you know, you guys got to come to us? But I was in the service for 20 years, and you know, people in the military, they think for themselves, but they do follow orders, and it's not too far removed to say, hey, you know, we got to do it for the president, for the country.
You know, the spookiest thing that I've heard today, Chris, and I've got all these articles printed out that I was going to share with you all and all this other stuff, but the thing that shocked me the most was a caller in the last hour from Lexington, Kentucky, Chris, I think her name was, who said that Mitch McConnell had come to a paid event to give a speech to a private paid event, and they were protesting across the street. And part of McConnell's official security detail, in addition to the police and the Secret Service and all that, was a motorcycle club. I mean, this is the Brown Shirts. The Brown Shirts were a volunteer force. They were not paid. And in many cases early on, they made their own uniforms. And they were a volunteer police force to support, to protect Hitler and all of his henchmen. And when I hear that somebody at the level of Mitch McConnell is bringing motorcycle gangs in to provide security, I'm thinking, okay, they're starting the Brown Shirts.
Yeah, this time around it's going to be the guys in the hard hats are not going to have Nixon stickers on. They're going to all say Trump.
Yeah. Well, it's already moving in that direction, and because his propaganda is very effective, and between right-wing hate radio and Fox News, it's ubiquitous. It's all across the United States. It's we're all saturated with these messages, and there's a lot of people who want to follow an authoritarian leader, especially when they feel insecure. And 35 years of Reaganomics gutting this country has produced a lot of insecurity.
Yeah, and who doesn't want to support the country and the White House, the American way of life,
right.
normally. But
right.
We're going to wake up to a big shock sometime soon, I'm afraid. So,
I think
hope I'm wrong.
I hope you're wrong too, Chris, but I fear that you're right. Chris, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Parker in Rio Vista, California. Hey, Parker, what's on your mind today?
Hi. The name is wrong there. It's Arthur.
Oh, Arthur, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm talking in relation to what you said about a Reichstag fire and the equivalent of that in America. I think it already happened on 9/11, and I think there are successive presidential regimes that are in line to progressively carry this out down through time.
Yeah.
After the Reichstag fire, Hitler put into place the Enabling Act, and immediately after 9/11, the United States under Bush put in the Patriot Act.
Right. This was my rant earlier.
Liberties and freedoms that are imposed upon by those two documents, they're almost as alike as two peas in a pod.
Well, not quite, but yeah, I don't disagree. And in fact, I've been saying that for some time, which is not to say that 9/11 was an inside job done by the Bush administration because they wanted to seize power. Rather, the Patriot Act had been written several years before. This stuff, they had been trying to get this stuff into law, but they couldn't get an agreement. They couldn't get a consensus, even within the Republican Party, that this was the right thing to do because it was such a radical document. It was such a big step in the direction of authoritarian government. But 9/11 provided them with the opportunity to do that. And George W. Bush demagoguing 9/11, repeating it over and over and over and over and over again. It was the defining and seminal moment of his entire presidency. And then trying to use that to get himself reelected, using that to declare two phony wars, using that to try to privatize Social Security in 2005, in the name of 9/11 and all these other things. It was starting to look like, oh my God, this is the Reichstag all over again. But now it's like, this is much slower. I think our institutions are much stronger than Germany's were in 1933. And there's going to be resistance. There is resistance right now, but the resistance is being worn down. It's a tough time. Arthur, thank you for the call. Very well said. Pat in Juanita, Nebraska. Am I saying it right, Pat?
You get it right every time.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Hey,
What's up?
Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, I agree with you 100%. Protests won't stop. They won't work. They won't be able to stop Trump. And especially with states like Arizona working to outlaw the right to assemble. And
right.
But Trump never would have been able to steal the presidency without press collaboration. Mainstream media made Trump. They need to rent a backbone and break him.
Yeah, I don't disagree. They gave him $2 billion worth of free publicity, about $1 billion of it in 2015, while Hillary Clinton was getting 1/10 of that, and Bernie Sanders was getting 1% of that. And they just, they all went in, as Les Moonves famously said, it may be bad for America, but it's great for CBS. And so CBS, NBC, ABC, and all the cable networks, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, it was all Trump all the time, because the Donald Trump reality show had ratings that were nearly as good as maybe better than the Donald Trump Celebrity Apprentice show. And
I remember the image of the empty podium at the debate when Bernie was giving a speech that they didn't even cover. And I mean, it was just
right.
sick and wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. The press owns this. And I agree with you. The press should be responding to this. Pat, thank you very much for the call. And maybe they are, in this kind of slow, awkward way of, Time and the Associated Press both boycotted last week's presser that Sean Spicer was doing, because he wouldn't allow in CNN and BBC and other agencies. So, maybe they're starting to wake up, but I wouldn't give them a whole lot of hope.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Because they are still dancing to the tune of the corporations that own them. There needs to be a firewall there. That's what the Fairness Doctrine was. We need it back. And welcome back. Alexandra in La Conner, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Alexandra, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. More important than that, thank you for what you do. I can't do what you have suggested, which is to get inside the Democratic Party. I have other things that take all of my attention. But what I do is I tell everyone who I can get to listen to me to listen to you. I even do the research and say, here, go here. This is where you can find Thom Hartmann. I'm calling you.
Thank you, Alexandra.
I wish I could say more, but they told me to be succinct. Not my strong suit to begin with. So here's the deal. I am so distressed about the fact that Keith Ellison did not become the head of the DNC. And I realize that what I'm about to do might not be a good thing, and it might not even matter, but it's what I can do. And I'm going to send the DNC a letter and say, take me off your mailing list. Don't keep asking me for money and sending me your stupid surveys, which miss the point entirely. You've missed the point. You've failed to recognize that the problem isn't Donald Trump. The problem is the Republican Party machine that steals elections. And until you start dealing with the issues, I'm not supporting the Democratic Party anymore. My money's going to go to MoveOn.org or Working Families of America. And that's what I can do. And I would love to have an idea that's better than that, but I'm just so angry that Keith Ellison did not become the head of the party.
Yeah. My guess is, Alexandra, that you're not going to be the only one to do that sort of thing, and that there are going to be people who probably don't do it as visibly as you are intending to do, but are just going to stop showing up. They're just disheartened. They're like, yeah, screw it. And, why am I doing this when I could be doing,
Well, and I'm not going to just say, screw it. I'm going to do anything and everything I can to do something. MoveOn.org is great. Yeah. They're doing something.
Another organization, Alexandra, that actually works to lobby the Democratic Party, but is not inside or part of the Democratic Party, is Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org. And they come to Washington, D.C. every month. We often have their people on the program here, specifically to go door to door in the House and Senate office buildings and lobby members of Congress on behalf of we the people and their members. And they hold events all over the country. They were the ones who started the Run, Bernie, Run thing that got Bernie Sanders to run for president. They're a great progressive group, and they are 100% committed to taking back the Democratic Party to its core values of the New Deal and the Great Society. And 1,000% committed to that. And so that's a way of reforming the Democratic Party without giving money to the Democratic Party, without being inside the Democratic Party. If genuinely feel that you can't do that. So, for what it's worth. MoveOn.org is a great organization too, but if you want one that's not, kind of mainstream, but is genuinely, solidly, hardcore progressive, PDAmerica.org is it. So, Alexander, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to KBCS, and thanks for sharing the good word about our program. I really, really, truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We're going to check in with Ellen Ratner and find out what's going on in the world, in the news, right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News to find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com. And on the line with us is Ellen Ratner. Hey, Ellen.
Thank you so much. It's interesting to note, I'm here at the White House where I was on Friday, and of course we weren't invited to that expanded gaggle.
Oh, really?
Wonder why.
Wow. You nasty liberal, you.
That's right. I'm just horrible. Okay. So now it's very interesting that Donald Trump today met with a bunch of conservative governors. He talked about the budget. He said that, and now the Office of Management and the Budget is actually, as we speak, giving a briefing upstairs. They basically said that President Trump is going to be proposing a $54 billion increase in defense spending for the next fiscal year, which begins October 1st, with an equal cut from non-defense discretionary spending.
That's huge.
It's absolutely huge, particularly because our military spends, more than 7 of the world's biggest militaries combined?
Right. Our military budget is in the neighborhood of $600 billion a year. Apparently it's $540 billion because he wants a 10% increase.
Right.
And all the rest of federal spending is another half a trillion. I mean, it's of discretionary spending. You take out Social Security and Medicare. And so any cut that they make, even small cuts, I mean, the National Endowment for the Arts, what's their budget? $16 million a year, something like that?
Nothing. And as is Corporation for Public Broadcasting, by the way, which is run by a Republican.
Right. So this is major meat cleaver time. This is exactly what Steve Bannon said he wanted to do, which is destroy America.
Well, I don't know that it destroys America for everybody.
Well, excuse me, destroy the American government.
For a lot of us.
the regulatory state to destroy the American government.
Then he talked about President Trump talked about the fact of wars and why he wants to increase the military spending. He said, "We never win. We have spent $6 trillion in the Mideast, and we have a hornet's nest, and we don't fight to win."
Right.
He also talked about how he was able to cut money from the F-35 fighter, and he said, "We cut the hell out of the prices." That's what he actually said today.
I've never seen that documented anywhere. Is that real or more fake news from Donald Trump?
No, he actually think he did negotiate a cut in the F-35, but I don't know exactly where it was cut and whether he cut the number of planes or whatever.
Right.
That's what I don't know. Okay. So tomorrow night is his joint speech to Congress, as you know, and he said that he is hoping to repeal and replace President Obama's Affordable Care Act, and he said he doesn't believe how complicated it was. Healthcare was complicated. He also met today with several CEOs from healthcare companies for a listening session. Vice President Pence and Kellyanne Conway were the White House staffers that were there.
By the way, that meeting with the governors, I understand there were 3 Democratic governors who were there, but they were escorted out of a separate door and not allowed to hang around for the photo ops or something?
He definitely only wanted to meet with conservative governors.
Yeah. So he found 3 conservative Democrats as well.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
But they weren't allowed to be equal.
Yeah.
Okay. Then what's really interesting is today, former President George W. Bush taped an interview that was broadcast this morning on NBC's Today Show. He said, "I'm for an immigration policy that's welcoming and upholds the law." He said, "It's important to recognize that this country's greatest strength is for people to be able to worship the way they want to or not worship at all." He said he thinks it's hard to fight a war on terrorism if we're in retreat, so that would seem to give something to President Trump. He said, "I think you have to take the man at his word that he wants to unify the countries, but we'll see what he's able to do." He also said that we all need answers about connections to the Russians and President Trump's associates. He said, "We need an independent media to hold people like me to account. Power can be very addictive and can be corrosive."
He would know.
He would know. That is quite something coming from a former president, even if it's a Republican former president.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so back to what he's planning on doing. As you know, when he announces tomorrow night at what used to be called State of the Union, but when it's the president's first term, it's not called that. It's called a joint session of Congress. And he said that, and it looks like the Environmental Protection Agency is, in addition to some real savings for people, such as food stamps, et cetera, are going to be on the target.
Yeah, I heard that they're going to cut food stamps, right off the top.
Now, that it's very interesting. They are also saying that Paul Ryan doesn't want to increase the deficit by just eliminating some taxes for the rich. So this is going to be interesting because some of the Republicans who are known as fiscal conservatives don't want the deficit to grow, but it will grow. Okay.
This is Reagan 2.0. I'm telling you.
Well, it's Ronald Reagan had a little better way of the press and with the people. I would.
Oh yeah, Reagan was charming and Trump is not, but his policies are Reagan 2.0.
Now, what's very interesting is that I'm getting towards old bathood, but Mayor Eric Garcetti, who is the mayor of L.A., he is running for re-election, and he is very concerned, as are many people concerned, that the Democratic National Committee is focusing on older people and not younger people, and they want to build up a farm team. They say they don't have one, that the people that they have are older ones. There's a Bronx Assemblyman, Michael Blake. He is a new party vice chairman, and he said there was a wide array of 30-somethings who ran for that position this year. We just can't talk about it. We have to be present.
Right.
Also, by the way, the president today said that he hadn't called Russia in 10 years. Well, he actually did speak with President Putin very shortly after he got...
yeah, it's funny. I was looking on Twitter, and the top trending hashtag was Russia in 10, and I'm like, what? So I went and looked at it.
Exactly. All right.
Trump lies again. Also,
as you know, a lot of the town meetings a lot of the members of Congress have been absent, but they've been going to fundraisers. So Paul Ryan, although he did go to a town meeting, he did not go to a town meeting, but he did go to a fundraiser in Florida, Texas, and California. And so that is very interesting. There has been a lot of fundraisers going, including a very famous fundraiser that takes place in Jackson Hole that costs people at least $5,000 apiece.
Wow.
To even show up.
So $5,000 to sit in the room with Paul Ryan.
Now, yeah, I think a lot of better ways I'd spend $5,000.
Yes, me too. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last two chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower. There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections. Yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst, a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference, bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians off of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist
who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK, despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer for no reason at all, and addled Ruby, a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by three mafia godfathers, Carlos Marcello, New Orleans, Santo Traficante, Tampa, Florida, and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All three were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd, JFK called off his motorcade, and then in Tampa on November 18th. He survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and super pleased to have back with us on the line Professor Stephen Cohen. He's a contributing editor to The Nation, Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at New York University and Princeton. His book, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, is out in paperback. You can read his writings over at thenation.com, and you can tweet him at The Nation. And Professor Cohen, welcome back to the program.
I'm always happy to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. You know Russia better than anybody I have ever met in my whole entire life. I mean, I believe you speak the language. You're familiar with the country. You've been a scholar in this realm for decades. What is, and Donald Trump and Russia are like all over the news right now. What is the current state of U.S.-Russian affairs?
Well, we're evidently at a historic turning point in American-Russian relations. You and I have talked repeatedly over the last maybe 2 or 3 years about a new Cold War that's gotten progressively more dangerous. In some ways more dangerous than the 40-year Cold War that Reagan and Gorbachev, the last Soviet leader, thought they had ended in 1989. Whether it started anew or never really ended, I'm not sure. But this Cold War sees the United States and Russia eyeball to eyeball militarily from the Baltic states on Russia's western borders and Ukraine on Russia's western borders to Syria. We didn't face anything quite like that during the preceding Cold War. So it appeared that, and it appears that what is desperately needed, as happened in the 20th century, is a new American-Russian policy, which we used to call détente, which means taking the Cold War as a given, but trying to introduce large elements of cooperation to reduce the elements of conflict, to make us all safer. Trump, oddly, because he's odd, I guess, was the only presidential candidate, beginning in the primary seasons through the general election, who said it would be great to cooperate with Russia. And a number of us who follow these things thought he meant whatever other not good things he said, that he was a proponent of a new American policy, which we would call détente. And he's continued to speak in some ways in that vein. But then arose this really widespread, unprecedented assault, bipartisan, on Trump as somehow being compromised by the Kremlin, a Kremlin agent, Kremlin puppet. And this has continued and mounted, and it comes from various sources. And it is what it is. And I wrote an article that went up it was in the Nation magazine last week and is on the web, looking at the 6 allegations that claim Trump is somehow treasonous or compromised in regard to Putin and the Kremlin. I don't find any facts for any of them, but these accusations have become a phenomenon in themselves, and thereby raise a fundamental question, is whether any kind of détente with Russia is really now possible. Trump may be so crippled, or he may be so inept, or he may be so insincere that no détente was ever possible. But if it was, and now it's being lost, this becomes a historic moment, because the question becomes, what's next then in American-Russian relations? And to end this prologue, we often forget in this country when we discuss Russia that there's a Russia that's discussing us, that's watching what we do very, very carefully, and having a debate in the highest circles in and around the Kremlin about what all this assailing of Trump, marked in some ways by the forced resignation of his national security advisor, General Flynn, what this means for Russia. Because the Kremlin was counting in some ways on some kind of détente policy between Putin and Trump for its own reasons. And now, if I understand the discussion going on in Russia, they're asking what you're asking. What does all this mean? Is this possibility of a better relationship now lost or being lost in Washington? Well, in a kind of abridged form, that's a brief, dramatic, but not over-dramatic summary of where things stand.
I would say, number one, it's fairly clear to me that Trump has been compromised by billionaires in the United States. And that certainly should be the focus of some of our attention, whether he's been compromised by Russia or not. But it's interesting. I was always wondering, it seemed like the first attacks on Trump with regard to Russia came, from people who were upset about the outcome of the election and who were looking for why is it that Hillary Clinton lost, or why is it that Donald Trump won? Oh, it must have been some external force, not a bad campaign or anything like that. But that's almost a little too facile. But the question in my mind was, why don't the Republicans want to investigate this if they believe there's no there, just to put it to bed? And now you've got a couple of Republicans who've come out and said, yeah, we need to look into this. Is the fear that they have that this will become the McCarthy hearings? Or are they, trying to actually get to the truth? I mean, I've been saying for some time, as an American, if our election was compromised by a foreign government, we damn well better find that out and expose it to the world. If it wasn't, we should put the rumor to bed, because this is a foreign government that has nuclear weapons. Am I being irrational here, Mr. Cohen?
No, and I would even go in some ways farther. Even though I find this, and I think it's a neo-McCarthyite assailing of Trump, distasteful and dangerous, it is what it is. It's gone so far that there has to be some kind of investigation. As you say, if there's any truth to these allegations against Trump or his associates, if any way they've been compromised by Russia, we need to know, of course. But to me, that seems unlikely. But the poison is in our political system, and we have to get it out quick before it spreads. Let me read you something, Tom, that you may not have seen that's worried me a lot, if you don't mind, very briefly. The New York Times op-ed columnists, the regular columnists, have been almost to a person and a woman a major driver of these Kremlin baiting allegations against Trump.
Yeah, Paul Krugman has been all over it, among others. Yeah.
Well, Krugman and Christoph and even Maureen Dowd's gotten in on it. It seems to be a playbook obligation at the Times that every columnist has to weigh in. But something startling appeared just recently. I almost missed it, but I think it's of enormous importance to all of us. This appeared in a Nicholas Christoph column on the web on February 15, in print on 16. He reiterated the allegations against Trump, the ones I investigate in my Nation article and find no evidence for. But then he says, or he permits a former CIA general counsel, I think, to say the following. And I'll read it slowly because I don't want you to miss what I think it means. But on the other hand, my eyesight's so bad, I got to get closer to it. So here is what appears in the middle of Christoph's column. The bigger issue here, in other words, he means apart from all these allegations of whether money or sex or associates have compromised Trump, he says the bigger issue here is why Trump and his people, the people around him, take such a radically different view of Russia than has been the case for decades. For me, this now becomes something different from allegations about behavior. It now abuts or enters into the realm of what people think. That people who think differently about Russia are coming under suspicion. Now, Christoph is right in that for more than 20 years, decades, there has been in America a consensual bipartisan Washington Democratic and Republican thinking about post-Soviet Russia and policy toward Russia, and it's been catastrophic. During these 20 years, a number of Americans have challenged this. I've written 2 books about it, not only Soviet Fakes and Lost Alternatives, but an earlier book called Failed Crusade. A number of very eminent American professors of international theory and relations like Professor Mersheim, John Mersheim at Chicago, have criticized this American way of thinking and orienting itself toward Russia. Henry Kissinger has been critical of it. So are we all now, for thinking differently from the consensual view about Russia, and none of us have any ties to Trump, well, Kissinger might, I don't know, but none of us are Trump supporters, are we now under suspicion for thinking differently about Russia than has been the American consensual norm for 2 decades? So what worries me now is this is spreading. There's one other thing, and then we should probably go on to how Russia's viewing all this, because that too isn't good. A number of newspapers, in criticizing or accusing Trump, have developed the expression that Trump has an affinity for Russia. I quote that, an affinity for Russia. What does that mean? Academics in my field of Russian studies, who study Russian culture and history, literature, they have an affinity for Russia. Dozens of major American corporations, Energy Corporation, Starbucks, Wendy's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, who are doing business in Russia, they have a financial affinity for Russia. Where is this going? And the danger is we're a hop, skip, and a jump from a kind of witch hunt, not looking into something criminal, but what people may have done, but the way people think.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. And we'll have to, well, we're hitting a break here. We'll have to continue this conversation in a minute. But I'm very curious about how this is all perceived in Moscow. And I know that you've got your ear to that ground. So we're talking with Professor Stephen Cohen, his latest book, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives. He writes for The Nation.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And that's, of course, thenation.com, the website. Professor Stephen Cohen will be back with us in just a minute. And welcome back. Professor Cohen, you were saying.
I was saying, the question becomes, and we should go on away from this because we're going to have to see how it plays out. I don't know, Trump may say something about this in his State of the Union address tomorrow night. I didn't know, by the way, presidents had State of the Union addresses after 1 month in office. So,
yeah.
But he may say something about the Russia thing tomorrow night. We may know something more. I just leave this thought with you that obviously it's where you began. We do have to have an investigation. But I worry, and I wrote this in The Nation, how in this atmosphere, including what I just read from Nicholas Christophe of the Times, would suggest that for thinking about Russia differently, we may be under suspicion. How do we keep this investigation from becoming a witch hunt? And that in connection with all this leaking that's going on against Trump from the intelligence agencies. So I don't know how you do that. And people have various suggestions. But I guess the next step is for people such as you, Tom, who know more about American politics and about Congress and about special prosecutors and investigators to figure this out in a way that the process is immune from some kind of witch hunt.
Yeah, it needs to be depoliticized. This is where I agree with Darrell Issa, which is some words that I never thought would cross my lips, that there should be an independent prosecutor, an independent investigator, or whatever. It should not be a partisan thing.
Well, you and I know, having achieved a certain age, and I more so than you, that everything is political, even in the best of times. You can never get politics out of anything. But given the toxic politics swirling around Trump and Russia today, somebody's got to figure out a way to prevent that toxicity from spreading and try to roll it back. Because you know what's going to happen in a process of investigation. There are going to be rumors, there are going to be broadcasts, because the mainstream media no longer fact checks anything in this regard. They just print it and hope they hit a target. But again, Tom, we forget, or we don't think enough about the fact that we're being watched and read and listened to by specialists and policymakers in Moscow who are trying to figure out what the heck is going on in the United States in this regard. So might I say a word about that? Because
please, we have 1 minute to the break, and then we can pick up the conversation after that.
All right, so let me summarize what I'd like to say after the break. First of all, there are specialists who advise the Kremlin, as well as journalists, who follow what is done in the United States very, very carefully. They read everything and they watch everything. Secondly, those people in and around the Kremlin represent a spectrum of views toward the United States, just as we have a spectrum of views in the United States toward Russia. And on that spectrum, there are conflicting, struggling, antagonistic forces discussing Russia policy toward us. And it might be worth a few minutes talking about that.
Okay. Do you see the world order unraveling?
Well, everybody says it is. My problem is I can't remember when the world was ever in particularly good order in my lifetime.
Excellent point. Excellent point. We'll be back with Professor Stephen Cohen in just a moment. He is the contributing editor to The Nation, Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at NYU and Princeton, the author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives. You can read his writings at thenation.com. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Professor Stephen Cohen on the line, contributing editor to The Nation, Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at New York University and Princeton, author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives. His two most recent articles that you can find over at thenation.com, Why We Must Oppose the Kremlin Baiting Against Trump, and Is Détente Really Dead? And I'd also like to just give a shout out to an article, Professor Cohen, that your wife, Katrina vanden Heuvel, wrote, which is in the Washington Post, if my recollection is correct, along these same lines. So you mentioned that Russia is paying as careful an attention to us as we are to them. I would think probably even more careful, given that they're a smaller country or a less powerful, less wealthy country. What's going on there?
Well, let me correct you in one regard. They have a hyperactive media, at least as substantial as ours. I mean, they have more on television almost every night, more primetime talk shows, whereas ours are relegated to the limited audience of cable TV. They have these talk shows, which are often shouting fests, and it's a complete misconception to think that anti-Kremlin views don't appear on this talk show. In fact, they put on 2 or 3 Americans who speak good Russian. That's how they get their ratings, because these are commercial shows with lots of breaks. And of course, their newspapers, they have more what we would call mainstream newspapers that the political class reads every day. I gather in this country maybe 3 are read: the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. There's about 6 or 7 such papers. So when it comes to media space, blare, and intensity, though theirs is, of course, less free than ours, there are equal. And in this media, you find all these different points of view. So if you think about a political spectrum of, I don't know, inside opinion or beltway opinion, there is a beltway around Moscow, by the way. They actually have 3 roads that now circumvent Moscow. But inside the Moscow beltway, in the arena where they are a kind of megaphone for Kremlin discussions, and they in turn affect Kremlin discussions, because these Russians are supposed to be specialists about us. Some are very good, some are just like we find on cable TV in this country, so-called experts of Russia who know nothing and are just hysterical. They got those too. Right. But there's a wide range of opinion. On the one side, there are people who think that Russia must seek détente with the United States, that for Russia to develop the way right-minded people want Russia to develop, Cold War, and certainly hot war, is a catastrophe. So they want, between Putin and Trump, or at least the White House, something akin to what Reagan and Gorbachev did in the late 80s, when they tried to end the arms race and the Cold War. On the other end are people who identify themselves as state nationalists, and they fear détente. They dislike the whole idea. And their reasoning is interesting. Like many conservatives in the United States as well, they're more historical minded than our liberals. They say, look what happened to Russia during the 2 preceding episodes of détente. The Reagan-Gorbachev détente of the late 80s led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia's collapse as a great power. Right. When it's back, but at that time. Now, that's not an accurate explanation of what happened.
Well, we just have a half a minute left.
That's their talking point. And then they say, look at the Clinton-Yeltsin détente of the 90s, when Russia plunged into humiliation at home and abroad for a decade. We can't have that again.
So there's just that fear of that. Any sense of which direction the country is going?
Well, that brings us to their take on what's going on in Washington today.
Which is?
Well, it appeared that the people who wanted détente and disregarded these apocalyptic arguments about preceding détente had the upper hand. But now there's been a swing, because the opponents of détente are saying Trump is crippled and he can't do détente even if we wanted it. So now we have to settle into Cold War.
Oh, my. And that's not good for either of our countries. Stephen Cohen, Professor Stephen Cohen with The Nation, thank you so much for being with us today, Stephen. A genuine pleasure. Thank you. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can read Dr. Cohen's works over at thenation.com. His new book, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, is now out in paperback. We'll be back. But the sales pitch that the Nazis put forward in the early 30s was that the Jews were a people apart. That was I forget how it's said in German, but a people apart. That they lived in their own communities, that they dressed differently, that they spoke differently. They spoke Yiddish rather than German, which is kind of a hodgepodge mixture of. It's sort of like down in Louisiana where it's Creole, sort of half French, half English. Yiddish is half Hebrew, half German, or not half and half. It's actually more German, but that was his sales pitch. These people aren't actually Germans. And so, therefore we should get rid of them. And Donald Trump, even when, yes, he talks about, quote, illegal immigrants, but he has also on a number of occasions, and certainly his surrogates and his buddies talk about things like we're losing our cultural identity, and why are we having Cinco de Mayo celebrations, and why are people flying the Mexican flag on May 5th, and this kind of stuff. And it's that people apart pitch. And if those people are visibly different from the white European norm, and Hispanics are in this country, as many Jews were in Europe, then A goes to B, B goes to C, C goes to D, and it's like from Milton Mayer's book. He pointed out, if you knew that when you got to D, when A went to B, if you knew that B was going to lead to D, then you would have stopped it. But you didn't know. So you get these incremental steps, step by step, until pretty soon it's like everything has changed around you. I wish I had a printout of Milton Mayer's book. I've done it many times on this show, where he went back and he talked to these Nazis, or people who had lived through Hitler's Germany and just didn't do anything. They just, normal people who held jobs all through the whole thing, through the war and everything. And this one guy said, please believe me, it happened incrementally, gradually, and everything, all these emergency measures were said to be for reasonable purposes. And he said, one day it's like the corn growing. One day it's over your head and you don't realize it. And that's what I see happening. Max, this is, thank you, Shano, for printing this out. Shane grabbed They Thought They Were Free, is the book by Milton Mayer. The subtitle is The Germans, 1933 to 1945. Milton Mayer was a reporter for the Chicago Sun, as I recall, and he went over to Germany and spent a fair amount of time there talking to these various people. And one of them, this fellow was a member of the, he was a professor, a college professor, and he just taught college all through the war, right? And not politics or anything like that. He says, to live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me, unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity, than most of us ever had the occasion to develop. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained for, or on occasion regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, but all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to, one no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing, and one day it is over his head. How is this to be avoided among ordinary men, even highly educated ordinary men? Frankly, I do not know. I do not see, even now, many times since it happened, I have pondered that pair of great maxims, principis obsta and finem respis, resist the beginnings and consider the end. But one must foresee the end in order to resist or even see the beginnings. One must foresee the end clearly and certainly. And how is this to be done by ordinary men or even extraordinary men? Things might have, and everyone counts on that might. Your little men, your Nazi friends, were not against National Socialism in principle. Men like me who are the great offenders not because we knew better, and that would be too much to say, but because we sensed better. Pastor Niemöller spoke for the thousands and thousands of men like me when he spoke too modestly of himself and said that when the Nazis attacked the communists, he was a little uneasy, but after all, he was not a communist, and so he did nothing. And then he attacked the socialists, and he was a little uneasier, but still he was not a socialist, and he did nothing. And then the schools, the press, the Jews, and so on, and he was still always uneasier, but still he did nothing. And then they attacked the church, and he was a churchman, and he did something, but then it was too late. You see, one doesn't exactly, I'm still reading from Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free. Brilliant book. I mean, if you want to understand World War II and the rise of the Nazis, read this book. He said, you see, one doesn't exactly see where or how to move. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and the next. You wait for one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when the shock comes, will join with you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you're not in the habit of doing it. It's not just fear of standing alone that restrains you. It's genuine uncertainty. And people say you're an alarmist. Remarkable. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Dwayne in Odessa, Texas. Hey, Dwayne, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I had a great uncle that immigrated here from Weimar, Germany. And he was actually one of the people that was...
Dwayne, I can hardly hear you, and Troy has got you cranked all the way up at 100% volume. Can you be sure to speak directly into the microphone of your phone?
He actually, my uncle, great uncle, was from a town in Germany called Weimar, and he actually had to walk through the Buchenwald camp in April of 1945 after the Germans were
Wow.
liberated, and he told my cousin the whole time, his daughter, the whole time that he was so upset at what he had seen because they weren't aware of what was going on, because they were being isolated from seeing what was true.
He was a German, and he was saying this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He lived in the town of Weimar. If you look it up, I think it's on there or something, or for the Buchenwald camp.
Mm-hmm.
And he, after the war was over, the soldiers made them walk through the camp to see the death.
Wow.
And everything going on. But what he told my cousin was to prepare her, because he believed in the fact that history repeats itself if you don't pay attention to it.
Right.
And he was explaining how isolated they were, how little they knew, and then how they supported him, Hitler, so much, and the Nazis in the way that they were, and they're great. And they allowed themselves to not listen to anything else, to not hear any other points of view of any kind. And, you know, whenever I got fired 4 years ago for supporting Obama, and I know this because the secretary of my boss overheard him and his boss just completely pissed about the fact that I supported him. They said, well, fine, let him see how it is to be on unemployment. And so much to the point, like I said, my cousin was listening to him describe what had happened and the way everything that led up to it, that after Fox News and the rest of them came about, and all the twisting of what goes on and the lack of transparency, she was told to keep an eye out for it, that it would happen again in this country. That any superpower would go through it, that it has throughout history. It reaches a pinnacle where wealth, and money, and power ignores everything underneath it, the legs that they stand on, the people. So they destroy them and topple over. So now everybody's afraid to actually mention the comparison between the Nazi propaganda and what's going on now with the fake, real fake news, the conservative point of view where it only wants to hear one side, you know? And if you look up the Buchenwald camp, the one thing that my great uncle said, that's the same thing. We didn't know. All I see and picture, and all she said was that you can picture these people not wanting to hear the other side after it's all over with and there's nothing but disaster, having the same thing to say.
Yeah.
We didn't know.
Yeah.
Only they had a good excuse. They didn't know because they were being isolated in all of they didn't have any other news sources. They were destroyed by the Nazi propaganda.
Right. The independent media was shut down in 1933 by the Enabling Acts. Good point, Dwayne, and thanks for sharing your story with us. That's a compelling one. It's a powerful one. I appreciate the call. Joe in Vail, Colorado. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Oh, I can't believe it.
I'm listening, Joe. You're on the air.
Oh, I'm really sorry, Tom. I was just trying to get you on speakerphone. Hey, Tom, I'm really calling about seems like so many references today to the Nazis and trying to compare what the Nazis did to what the GOP is doing today and what Trump is doing today. That I just don't quite understand how you can compare, politics to genocide. I mean, the Nazis committed mass genocide. How can you even use those two words in the same sentence, GOP and the Nazis?
Yeah.
And, to go along with that, I mean, calling right-wing radio hate radio, I mean, it seems like a lot of that happens on the left, too.
Okay, Joe, thanks for sharing your opinion. Sam in West Bloomfield, Michigan. Hey, Sam, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I just want to make a couple of comments about your previous guest, Mr. Cohen, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon me?
I said yes. Go ahead.
Yes. He was very, very careful about blaming Trump for connection with Russia. I was wondering, during the Benghazi event, was he that careful and, persistent that we have to find the facts? One, and also, when it was brought up, I don't know, by you or him.
Well, hang on just a second, Sam. Stephen Cohen is a progressive. He was not going after Hillary Clinton for Benghazi. He writes for The Nation magazine. His wife, Katrina Vanden Heuvel, is the editor and publisher of The Nation magazine. He's got extraordinary progressive credentials. So if you think that he was here to apologize for Donald Trump or for Russia, you're wrong. He's a scholar.
I accept that, but when he brought up that this Russian connection kind of blew up after the election,
right.
It was not because Paul Manafort left. You didn't even mention that Paul Manafort left, and it was a lot of Russian connection ideas before that.
Sure.
And may I make one more comment, Tom?
Yeah.
I'm an Iranian American, and during our revolution, these mullahs set up a movie theater on fire and practically burned 300 people alive and blame it on Shah. So these crazy people, these dictator people, they do these things.
Yeah. Well, and this is the problem with authoritarian policies is, as the previous caller, authoritarian policies may not lead to genocide, but they certainly point in that direction. I'm not suggesting that Donald Trump is going to be putting people in the ovens, but deporting 11 million people is, a substantial effort, blocking Muslims into the United States.
Right.
Clearly, these are not genocide, but this is, but the authoritarianism in and of itself, is it not appropriate to call out how we are losing our small d democracy and our small r republic, at the hands of everything from the Patriot Act to what's going on right now. I think it's entirely appropriate to point out. Sam, thanks for the call. Noel in Amherst, Virginia. Hey, Noel, what's on your mind?
Hi, I was really pleased to listen to your guest, David Cohen.
Stephen Cohen.
Stephen. And now I'm going to buy his book. But I was following the relationship of Russia and the United States, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I remember distinctly first President Bush, he said we should not rub the Russians' nose in it that they lost, that we should not expand NATO through Eastern Europe to the Russian border, and that we were going to need Russia.
Right. That was the deal that he made with Gorbachev, in fact, that we would not put NATO in any country, that no countries that bordered Russia would become members of NATO. That deal has been blown up.
It has been blown up. And then also I listened to Vladimir Putin, and he says, his interest into Ukraine, geographically and historically and ethnically, he said that Russia has been invaded twice through that route. And I think he was referring to Napoleon
And World War II, yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like that. I mean, that history was not that long ago, but there are no contemporaries today that, outside Stephen Cohen and maybe George Walker Bush, who remember, recent history.
Yeah, I think that Americans would be well advised to consider what would happen if Canada, for example, was to become part of, well, there really is no leftover Russian equivalent to NATO, but if there was, but yeah, I very much do not want to be in the position of being a Russia apologist. I see big problems in Russia. I see big problems in the United States. I think that we just need to look at this whole thing with clear eyes and try to make the best out of it. Which, oddly enough, for whatever reason, Trump has been talking about, and everybody else has been saying no. And this is no support of Donald Trump at all. But the conversation has devolved into name calling. I don't think that that's good for either country. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. Welcome back. Lori in River Pines, California. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Lots of grim stuff today, and I think it's important for us to stay heartened and to keep at it as strongly as we have begun. But I do have a bright spot here in California. There is a measure, it's Senate Bill 562, to establish single-payer health care in California. That has passed the legislature in the past, but...
twice.
Pardon me?
Twice. Schwarzenegger vetoed it twice.
And yes. But now we have Jerry Brown. He will not veto it. And so I am very hopeful that it will pass, and also hope that perhaps starting with the other western states, that will move from state to state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, we talked about this last week. I fully expect if California goes single payer, that within 5 years, Oregon and Washington State will join them or imitate them. And given the critical mass that's necessary to ensure a population, and this was the problem that Vermont ran into, Vermont actually passed single payer. Their governor, Peter Shumlin, or their ex-governor, ran for office on the promise of single payer. He did it. He passed it through the legislature. He created a commission to put it into place. And they finally determined that with only 600,000 people in the state, they didn't have enough people to create that critical mass to make single payer work. You need more than 600,000 people. I mean, United Healthcare right now is providing health insurance to 112 million people in America. That's critical mass. 600,000 isn't. But you've got 30 some odd, 36 million people living in California, I think is the number. That's enough to create an insurance program, and then you bring in the 4 or 5 million people who live in Oregon and the 5 or 10 million people who live in Washington State, and you've got something really powerful. I think, spot on. Lori, thank you for the call. Yvonne in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Yvonne, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I am calling you to kind of clarify all the misconceptions about immigration issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of semantics in my book. There is a big difference between a refugee and an immigrant.
Yes.
An immigrant is a person that does it spontaneous or for personal reasons and goes through the legal process. The refugee is that person that has to leave wherever they live because of issues and problems.
Right. Typically threats to life or limb.
Huh?
typically threats to life or limb. And yeah, okay.
All right. So, for instance, people call these immigrants without knowing. Why do we have in the United States so many undocumented, not illegal, undocumented people from Latin America? Well, you know the history because I have heard you on the phone. I've been listening to you for years.
Yvonne, we're running out of time here. We're hitting the break. But if your point is that the people fleeing violence in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador should be granted refugee status, I do not disagree with that at all. I think that particularly these children who were sent here, they are refugees in my mind. Yvonne, thank you so much for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Roosevelt in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Hey, Roosevelt, what's on your mind today?
Hey, what's up? I'm talking about this defense spending. I'm wondering if on this defense spending that Trump is doing, I'm wondering if they're going to, I have a son and a daughter who's in the military. Are they going to spend any money on the GIs themselves? Or are they going to spend it on housing, or schooling, child care? How much of that money are they just going to spend it on machines?
I'd be very surprised, Roosevelt, if they spent any of that money on human beings, because what they're trying to do is pay off their campaign donors, which is the defense industry. And the defense industry doesn't make any money when the government simply raises paychecks or provides better health care to people in the military. They only make money when the government buys hardware. So we can pretty much guarantee that this is going to be entirely hardware.
She is struggling to pay child care.
Yeah, people in the military. Yeah, have some. It's actually for many people it's a sacrifice now to join the military. Not even setting aside the possibility of going off someplace and getting shot. It's a sacrifice.
And I'm not cutting you off. And then when she got out, I mean, the school, the way they got this set up for the school, that's a struggle for them to even get in school.
Yeah, I agree. If he wants to spend $60 billion, $54 billion, he should put it into a new GI Bill. And
that's what he should do.
Yeah, and give people free college and
the child care.
Yep, and backstop their ability to purchase a home. I mean, the GI Bill could be rolled out just exactly as it was in 1946, and it would be just as good. Roosevelt, great points. Thank you so much for calling and making them. Steve in Chestertown, Maryland. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, it's great to talk to you. I am watching you on TV, but talking. I've started reading Gun Control in the Third Reich, and that's probably in line with one of the enabling acts that occurred early on in German history in the Third Reich.
Well, yes and no. The Nazis actually sponsored gun clubs throughout, right up until World War II broke out. And they had youth groups that did weapons. There was a lot of weapons training in Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler talked about how, having a gun is a manly thing. I'm not sure what you're reading. I'm hoping it's not something from John Lott or one of these guys who basically is a shill for the National Rifle Association. But Germany's gun laws were actually much stronger before Hitler came to power. Hitler loosened the gun laws in Germany until the war broke out. When the war broke out, basically, all the guns went into the hands of the military, and the military could confiscate any guns from any civilian anywhere. And of course, I think it was 34 or 35. It's been 30 years since I read Shearer's book, but somewhere in the mid-30s there, the Germans outlawed the ownership of guns by Jews. So, and sometimes that by Jews part gets dropped off, and they say, oh, the Germans did gun control. Well, yes and no.
I think what got me thinking about something that I listened to you or heard you say, talking about Reagan when he was governor and the Black Panthers showed up to protest with weapons.
Yep.
And how
and within a few months, California had gun control. Yep.
Right. So I don't want to sit back in Chestertown, Maryland, and be content saying that we're so crazy in this country with guns that Trump could never, become a dictator, a totalitarian dictator. But I'm not going to be content with that.
Yeah.
With that thinking either, because that could change in a
Well, the bottom line is that if our government goes totalitarian, it's not going to be guns that are going to save us. It's going to be masses of people. And in fact, if it turns into guns, then it's going to be a bloodbath. There's no way that Sheriff Mack and his buddies with whatever kind of guns they're able to pull together could take on the U.S. military. There's just no way. We've got to resolve this peacefully. Stephen, thank you for the call. Jim in Malden, Massachusetts. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey, Tom. This is total conspiracy theory, but I first thought of it when you were mentioning talking about Scott Walker when we thought he might be the Republican nominee, how he's a Dominionist and he wants to bring God back and all these.
Right. He's been replaced by Mike Pence, who's the same thing.
And I was thinking, because of all this demonization of Muslims and banning people from countries that never attacked us and wanting to bring gods back into the schools and the government and stuff, do you think there's an element in our government that wants to start a holy war with the Middle East so they can bring Jesus back?
Yes. I don't know to what extent that they're in our government, but I know that there's a large faction in the United States. Many of the Christians who are, quote, big supporters of Israel, end quote, the purpose of their support, they're reading Revelation 7 and Revelation 14, and the purpose of their support is they believe in the end times that there will be a war in the Middle East and that it will only happen after the Second Temple is established and Jerusalem is entirely under the control of Jews, and that only 144,000 Jews will survive that war, and they will all convert to Christianity, and at that moment, Jesus returns. And,
too, especially with the environmental stuff, how they're kind of raping the country for everything. It's, it's all fine. Jesus will fix it when he comes back.
That's virtually verbatim of what James Watt, Reagan's Interior Secretary, said when he was challenged about why was he selling off public lands for pennies on the dollar. He was like, Jesus is going to return and make all things new. It doesn't matter. Jim, excellent point. Thank you. John in Madison, Wisconsin. John, we got about a minute to the end of the show. What's up?
You're making me miss the Cold War. So a comment on Professor Cohen. I'm a Cold War vet, and I have a healthy distrust for guys like Vladimir Putin, and that's based upon their behavior and their actions.
I think that's that's a reasonable concern. Putin is not. Russia is not the United States, and Putin is neither Trump nor Obama. Let's just establish that.
Also, I ran into the Speaker of the House over the weekend at a ski hill up in Wausau, Wisconsin, about 3 hours north of Janesville. And he was with his family, so I didn't address him directly. But I had a brief conversation with his security person, or probably Secret Service. And I just asked him to pass on to the congressman for me, to the Speaker, that that we need an independent, bipartisan investigation of this Russia thing to get it behind us.
I agree.
And anything short of that is I think, a true disservice to the Republic. And
I think it should not even be bipartisan. It should be nonpartisan. It should be somebody who is, just like a professional judge, a professional prosecutor, somebody who, although I suppose, the country's so damn polarized these days that it's almost impossible to find somebody who doesn't have partisan leanings. John, thank you for the call. You I think, nailed it. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll be back tomorrow. And there's no shortage of stuff. Tomorrow is the State of the Union address. We're going to start finding out the real stuff that's really going to impact average American lives coming out of this Republican-controlled House, Senate, and White House. And I don't think it's going to look good. Stick around. Come back tomorrow, same time, same place. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.